Chapter 1. Under the pitch-black sky, the continuous mountain range was like a crouching beast, quietly waiting for the break of dawn. At the foot of a small hill shaped like a crouching cow, there was a small village. Lier, get up and get to work. A yell broke the silence. A middle-aged woman with a bucket-like waist yelled at the cowshed. In a pile of hay in the cowshed, a skinny young man suddenly woke up from his dream. He thought blankly, "Where am I?" He had that dream again. In the dream, he lived in a city with tall buildings. He played with a magical artifact called a computer all day, and there were steel monsters running amok on the streets. Finally, one day, he was killed by a monster called BMW. Then he suddenly woke up. Yes, he had transmigrated. Over a dozen years had passed. He had almost treated the events of his past life as a dream. Looking around the dirty cowshed, he felt the itch from the mosquito bites. Clearly, this was not a good place. There was probably no other transmigrator in the world as miserable as him. Looking at the time, it had been about 15 years. His parents in this life were the most ordinary farmers in Crouching Ox Village. They passed away when he was young, and he was raised by an older brother. His brother was Lida, so he was called Lier. There were not many rules in the village. Many villagers did not have proper names in their lives. With the knowledge of his past life, he gave himself a name, Li Qingshan. There is no need to bury one's bones in the village. Life is full of green mountains. Even though he had transmigrated, he wanted to live well. No, he wanted to live better than he had in his past life. Only then would he not waste the second life that the heavens had given him. He remembered when he had just transmigrated, when he had calmed down from his fear and confusion. The great ambition of a transmigrator was ignited in his chest. However, he soon discovered that he was hungry and had no food to eat. His brother and sister-in-law only treated him as a burden. They threw all the dirty and tiring work to him, but the food he ate was always the worst. There was no familial love at all. He was young and had nowhere to go. He could only try to act like a child prodigy. However, he was thought to be possessed by a ghost. The witch in the village forced him to drink a lot of talisman water, so he did not dare to act rashly anymore. Therefore, the villagers still called him Lier. Li Qingshan was just a joke. Li Qingshan's sister-in-law scolded him for a while. Seeing that he didn't respond, she rushed in, waved the bamboo stick in her hand, and mercilessly whipped him. Lazy bones, still pretending to be dead. Pretend to be dead. Li Qingshan was thinking about his past and present lives. His mind was in a mess. He suddenly stood up and snatched the bamboo stick, glaring at the peasant woman. Sister Li saw that the child from back then was now a head taller than her. Although she was afraid, her aura was not weak at all. "Lier, I've raised you so hard, and you still dare to be rude to me. When your brother wakes up, I'll let him teach you a lesson. If you don't work, then don't eat." She turned around and left. After Sister Li left, Li Qingshan threw down the bamboo stick and sighed heavily. He walked to the side of the trough and said to an old oxen, "Brother Ox, I've grown up and I don't want to live anymore. I just don't want to leave you." Before his parents died, they divided the family's property. The cottage and the fields were taken by his brother and sister-in-law. Now, the only property he had left was this oxen. Fortunately, he had this ox. He often went to the landlord's house to help, and he could still make a living. If he only ate vegetables at home, he didn't know how thin and weak he would become. Therefore, not only did he not treat it as an animal, but he also respectfully called it Brother Ox. The villagers all said that Lier could live without Brother Li, but he couldn't live without Brother Ox. The oxen's fur was glossy, and it was plump and sturdy. It was possible to tell just how much effort Li Qingshan had put into taking care of it. However, it also seemed rather old, and one of its horns was missing. The cut was extremely smooth, as if it had been cut off by a sharp blade. The oxen opened its moist eyes and looked at Li Qingshan, as if it had understood him. It gathered its spirit and stood up. Li Qingshan mounted the ox with great familiarity, and the oxen slowly made its way towards the crouching ox hill. Riding on the oxen, Li Qingshan raised his head. The stars were extremely bright, a resplendence that did not exist in that world. He was like a regular cowherd, blowing into the clear flute. The sound of the flute reverberated through the morning mist. Behind him, the village was gradually waking up. On the crouching ox hill, the trees were sparse, and the grass was green. Using the light from the east, Li Qingshan gazed towards the west. The mountains stretched endlessly, and if he ventured deeper, he would reach the myriad great mountains. It was said that not only were there wolves, tigers, and leopards, but there were also mountain spirits and ghosts. Even hunters dared not venture too deeply. Li Qingshan had never seen a proper map in the village, nor did he understand the hydrology and geography of this world. All he knew was that the mountains and rivers were extremely lofty, while the rivers were extremely vast. Although it was filled with danger, there was always a great world waiting for him to wander through. Li Qingshan had already made up his mind to leave. In the end, he patted the back of the oxen. "Brother Ox, oh brother Ox, you're already so old. If I sell you, other people will definitely butcher you and eat you. The world is vast, so you should go. There are many wolves, tigers, and leopards in the mountains, so you have to be careful." At a time like this, the smartest thing to do was to sell oxen and gather some traveling expenses. That way, he would have some protection when he arrived in Qingyang City, just in case he starved to death on the streets. However, he refused to do that. Any farmer would laugh if they heard such a childish approach, but this was what he persisted with. "Since you call me Big Brother, how can I bear to leave you? Even if you can accompany me for a long time, there will still be a time when we part." Li Qingshan replied instinctively, but his voice gradually trailed off. He widened his eyes and stared at Oxen. All he felt was a chill run down his spine. He took a step back. "Demon," Oxen said, "don't be afraid. I won't harm you." After all, they had known each other for so many years, so Li Qingshan was not too afraid. He was just unable to accept this surreal scene for a moment. However, when he thought about everything he had experienced, he calmed down. He frowned and asked in a probing manner, "Are you really Brother Ox?" Seeing how he had calmed down so quickly, Oxen nodded in approval. "You really do possess innate wisdom." "What innate wisdom?" Li Qingshan immediately raised his guard. He definitely did not want anyone to know about his identity as a transmigrator. He thought about how he could still put on an act in front of other people normally, but he was not as vigilant against Oxen. It must have seen all of his actions that did not match his identity and age. In the 6 realms of Sasra, there will occasionally be creatures who retain some memories of their past lives. This is known as innate wisdom. You and I both possess the memories of another identity. We're not regular farmers. Oxen, being able to meet, can be considered as fate. "I see." Li Qingshan eased up slightly inside. He had heard about this before, but at least his identity as a transmigrator had not been exposed. "I never thought there really would be demons in this world, and I've even raised one for over a decade. Why didn't you say anything before?" "There's nothing to say. I won't ask where you come from, and you won't ask where I come from either. All you need to know is what I can give you." "Give me what?" "Have you heard of supernatural powers?" Before Li Qingshan could ask, the Black Ox continued. "So-called abilities are the abilities of gods and demons that can penetrate the world. They can move mountains and fill seas, and they can pluck the stars and moon from the sky. If you want to live forever, you can live forever. If you want to live forever, you can live forever. If you want to live forever, you can live forever. Not to mention glory, splendor, wealth, money, and beauties, you can have them at your fingertips. Are you tempted? The word supernatural power contained all the desires of all living beings. Li Qingshan was just one of them. So how could he not be tempted? But the deeper feeling was that it was unbelievable. It was like a person who had been blind for over a decade suddenly opened his eyes. Everything in front of him was so dazzling and full of unreality. Li Qingshan suppressed the excitement in his heart. Brother Oxen, are you going to teach me that kind of supernatural power? Oxen shook its head. You're not qualified yet. It then changed the topic. If you want to cultivate supernatural powers, you have to eat meat first. What? Li Qingshan wondered if he had heard wrongly. He felt that it was ridiculous. How could a supernatural power that could move mountains and fill seas and pick the stars and moon be related to such an ordinary thing? The first step of cultivation is refining essence into qi. You have to refine the essence in your body into qi. With your sallow and emaciated appearance, how can you have essence to refine? Li Qingshan smiled bitterly. Anyone who grew up like him would not be able to become strong. And for a person who could not even lift a bucket of water to talk about moving mountains and filling seas, wasn't it ridiculous? Dare I ask, where does meat come from? How could Li Qingshan not want to eat meat? Compared to the illusory elixirs, the taste of meat was truly engraved in his mind. It made him dream about it at night, and he still missed it. But how could a poor lad who could not even fill his stomach with coarse grains get delicious meat? He couldn't help but stare at the fat and strong body of Brother Oxen, subconsciously dividing it into tenderloin, T-bone, rib, and many other parts in his mind, his eyes gleaming with greed. Oxen hit his head. Don't even think about it. Then it raised its hoof and pointed to the 100,000 mountains in the west. The meat is in there. Li Qingshan was surprised instead of delighted. Being a hunter in this world was not that easy. The jackals, wolves, tigers, and leopards of the mountains were not to be trifled with. Chapter 2. I lost it, Li Qingshan answered stiffly, as if he had been knocked back to the cruel reality from a fantasy world. Hurry up and go look for it. If you dare to lose our family's cow, your brother will beat you to death when he comes back. If the cow is gone, you'd better get lost too. That's my cow. Li Qingshan strode out of the door. If he didn't leave, he might not be able to stop himself from beating this woman up. However, if he really did that, he would no longer be able to stay at home. He would no longer be able to take shelter under the eaves of others. It wasn't until dusk that he returned to the cowshed, exhausted. His bright eyes looked around the empty cowshed, and then dimmed again. Apart from herding the cows and cleaning up, Li Qingshan's daily work was to bring the cows to the landlord's house in the village to help out and earn some money to supplement his family's expenses. Today, without the cow, he could only do the same work as the other long-term workers. Even adults would find it hard to do that kind of work, let alone a young man like him who hadn't even eaten breakfast. Compared to the exhaustion of his body, the insults and curses from the farm manager were nothing more than a trivial matter. He fell head first into the haystack and didn't want to think about anything else. However, his stomach started to growl again. It was conceivable that in such an environment, any interest would be worn down to the point where only the most basic physical needs were left. Li Qingshan was in a daze when he heard a bang. It was the sound of something heavy falling on the ground. He opened his eyes and saw a strange face with a pair of long white tusks. He couldn't help but jump in fright. When he woke up, he saw that it was a wild boar. It had just died, and it was still warm. Oxen was lying in front of the trough, smiling at him. He could already vaguely make out the expression on Oxen's face. Night fell. In the village house, Mrs. Lee was complaining to Brother Lee, "That little bastard is too inhumane. He even lost such a big cow. No, he must have secretly sold it. No, we must separate from the family. If we continue living like this, we will be in trouble." Elder brother Lee was in his 30s. He was tall and strong, and he was famous for being tyrannical in the village. However, he was extremely respectful towards his wife. But after we split up, those few acres of good land were given to him in front of the elders in the village. They used the reason that Li Qingshan was too young to farm as an excuse to occupy this piece of land. They didn't want to return it now, but if they officially separated from the family, they would have to return it. Hasn't Steward Lu always wanted this piece of land? We might as well sell it to them. If that little bastard has the guts, he can go ask him for it. But what if he doesn't want to? Starve him for 3 days. Aren't you worried that he won't agree? While the two were discussing, Mrs. Lee suddenly sniffed and said, "Do you smell something? It smells so good. It seems like someone's cooking meat. It's not New Year's Day. Why are they cooking meat? It seems it's nearby." The two followed the smell and came to the cowshed. They saw a pot in the cowshed with firewood burning under it. The soup in the pot was boiling, and a fragrant smell spread. The fire swayed in the darkness, casting Li Qingshan's shadow on the wall. Mrs. Lee swallowed her saliva and said, "You little bastard, where did you steal the meat?" She was not only lazy but also greedy, looking at the pot of meat soup. She even forgot that Li Qingshan had offended her. She went forward and picked up the spoon to stir it. However, elder brother Li's eyes were sharp. He saw what Li Qingshan was sitting on and exclaimed, "Wild boar!" Wild boars could be said to be extremely dangerous in the mountains. Its skin was rough and thick, and it was difficult to be injured by swords. Ordinary hunters would retreat when they saw it, let alone capture it. When I was looking for a cow, I picked it up at the foot of the mountain. It was injured, probably because it was chased by hunters and had nowhere else to go. Li Qingshan made up an excuse. The existence of oxen must be kept a secret. Otherwise, if the news of the demon cow spread, who knew when the heavenly palace would come to find them? Elder brother Li was skeptical, but he also laughed and said, "Brother, you are a fool with a fool's luck. When I bring this pig to the market, I can definitely sell it for a good price and save it for your wife." At the same time, he also saw the oxen in the cowshed. He thought that there was no need to rush to separate from him. The cow could still do some farm work. Li Qingshan watched as the sister-in-law stirred in the pot, as if all she wanted to do was try a piece. His good mood from cooking the meat was immediately destroyed. With a smack, he smacked the sister-in-law's hand away. "Don't touch it." Sister-in-law Li covered her hand and stepped back. She wailed, "Look at your brother. I told you that he bullied a woman when you weren't at home. You didn't believe me. Now he's doing it in front of you." "Bullied you?" Li Qingshan only felt a wave of nausea. "If your surname was Pan, I wouldn't have suffered a loss." Elder brother Li's face suddenly became gloomy. "Is this how you act as an uncle?" Li Qingshan lowered his head and said, "I have my own plans for this meet. I am not young anymore. It is time for us to separate." This was something he had been thinking about when he was cooking the meat. He was no longer willing to bow his head under the eaves of this house. Elder brother Li did not expect that before he could say anything, Li Qingshan would bring it up first. He was stunned for a moment and then became angry. He was a stupid farmer and could not hold back his anger. He clenched his fists and stepped forward, wanting to beat up Li Qingshan and drag this wild boar away first. Li Qingshan saw that elder brother Li's momentum was not right. He also stood up. His face was grim, but his heart felt a little weak. His bones were not fully grown yet. He had been tired for a day and had not eaten anything. How could he fight against a grown man? He glanced at Oxen from the corner of his eyes, but Oxen only watched this scene as if it was watching a show. It had no intention of helping. Just as Li Qingshan was groaning in his heart and preparing to receive a beating, elder brother Li stopped in his tracks and looked at Li Qingshan's right hand. In that rough hand was a short knife that was equally rough. The blade was full of impurities. Even though it had been carefully polished, it was still dull and lusterless. This was a short knife that Li Qingshan had bought from the bazaar after living frugally all these years. It was useful in many places. Just now, he was using this knife to cut meat. Li Qingshan immediately understood that his elder brother was afraid. He was not afraid of himself, but of this knife. And before this moment, he had never realized that the shoddy knife in his hand had the power to deter others. In his previous life, Li Qingshan was only an ordinary student. Although he had fought a few times, it was just disputes between fellow students. In both of his lives, he had never had the experience of facing a weapon. Understanding this, Li Qingshan clenched the knife in his hand and deliberately raised it up, like a wild beast showing off its fangs, even though he did not dare to use it. Elder brother Li immediately took a step back, and Mrs. Li also did not dare to howl. In the end, the two of them actually retreated from the cowshed with extremely disappointed expressions. They cursed outside for a while before returning to their room to discuss their grand plan. However, Li Qingshan turned a deaf ear to it. He even tossed the fragrance of the meat to the back of his mind. All he did was stare at the dagger blankly. His face was vaguely reflected in the dagger. This cheap item of a few taels of silver had just protected him, preventing him from physical pain and humiliation. Moreover, it had protected his spoils of battle. Although this was a matter of course at this moment, it was as if he had suddenly become enlightened. Oxen was lying in front of the trough, smiling at him. The flames flickered, and the black giant stood on the wall with the knife in his hand. At this moment, a young man understood the exact value of strength. After a long time, Li Qingshan sat down again, scratching his ears and cheeks as he looked at the pot. How much longer will this meat need to cook? He had always been a person who could not live without meat. These past 10 years had been really bitter for him. When his parents were still alive, he could still eat a few mouthfuls of meat during festivals. But after his parents passed away, the meat they cut was not even enough for Mrs. Li. At this moment, even if there was a bottle of immortal pills in front of him, it would not make him as anxious as this pot of meat. The pig was a big pig, and this pot of meat had been cooking for half the night. The rising flames, the drifting aroma, the crackling sounds, and the focused young man formed a scene that was neither romantic nor poetic, but extremely simple and primitive. In the end, although there was not even a bit of salt, not to mention other spices, it made Li Qingshan eat so much that he almost swallowed his tongue. Regardless of fat or lean, several kilograms of cooked meat entered his stomach, and in the end, even the broth was completely drunk. At this moment, if someone asked Li Qingshan what happiness was, he would definitely say that happiness was a pot of meat. Chapter 3. Li Qingshan laid down on the pile of hay in satisfaction. He stretched out his limbs and fell asleep before he knew it. That night, he did not dream of his past life again. In the hut near the cowshed, the elder Li and his wife tossed and turned restlessly due to the smell of meat. They only fell asleep in the middle of the night as well. The next morning, right after the rooster crowed 3 times, a short, plump man in emerald green silk robes arrived at the fields. He was none other than the largest landlord in the tiny, crouching ox village, Old Master Lu, who was also the caretaker Lu that the elder Li's wife mentioned. Because he had once served as a caretaker for a large clan in the city, he received the blessing of the clan when he grew old, allowing him to return to his hometown in glory. However, he still wanted to be referred to as caretaker Lu so that he could display his completely different status from these bumpkins and distinguish himself from regular bumpkin landlords. And because most of the land in the village had been annexed by him through various methods, he gained the elegant name of Half-Village Lu. If Half-Village Lu had any ambitions, it would obviously be to become Lu Chuansuan. However, he could not rush this. Using the words he had heard from the mister in the city, it was to take it slow. He believed he would definitely be able to fulfill this wish within his lifetime. By then, everyone in the village would be his workers, and he would be the local tyrant of the village. He could do whatever he wanted. However, caretaker Lu was rather displeased right now. He saw that there were not a lot of workers working on his land. He waved his plump hand. Why are there only a few people? Where are the others? A worker smiled along. Caretaker Lu, they've all gone to help Li-Er build a house. Li-Er? Which Li-Er? That cowherd. Of course I know. Where did he get the money from? That kid got lucky. He picked up a huge wild boar for free. As long as anyone in the village is willing to help him build a house, they'll be given a large piece of pork. It's right below the Crouching Ox Hill. It's very popular right now. Then why aren't you going? I've fallen out with him, the worker said awkwardly. He was extremely reluctant. That was meat. How could he eat it normally? Caretaker Lu fiddled with his mustache. Let's go and have a look too. As soon as he woke up, Li Qingshan began to work on the separation of the family. The most important thing was to build a decent house for himself. He couldn't live under someone else's roof anymore. In the past, he did not have such an ability, but with this big wild boar, many things were easily solved. With a slight call, many people came to help, and he could say that he had seen the magic of pork in this world. The scenery below the Crouching Ox Hill was picturesque. If this were his past life, a place like this would either be a tourist attraction or a residential area for wealthy people. Why would he have the right to occupy it? Moreover, this place was far away from the village, so it was convenient for him to keep secrets. He could communicate with oxen without worry. Li Qingshan stood among the crowd and gave out commands. He was in an indescribably good mood, and he somewhat understood what oxen meant by eating meat. It wasn't just to strengthen one's body. If it was a person without food and clothing, he would spend all day in order to fill his stomach. How would he have the mood to do other things, let alone see his true nature? Caretaker Lu stood in the distance and glanced over. He muttered to himself. In other words, the brothers are going to split up. However, he just happened to see the eldest Li couple watching from afar as well. Not only were they unhappy when they saw their brother move to a new house, but they even ground their teeth in resentment. As a result, he came up with a plan and walked over with a smile. In less than a dozen days, a new house was completed. Everyone collected their pork and dispersed. Li Qingshan gazed at his new residence in satisfaction. It was just a regular mud house with a thatch covering it. He stood in a small courtyard surrounded by a fence. But this was his new home. It was the first step for him to settle down in this world. Over the past few days, he had been eating meat every day, so his complexion had recovered a healthy glow. He had gained some confidence as he stood there. Although it had only been around a dozen days, he seemed to have grown a few inches out of nowhere. Just as Li Qingshan was feeling happy, an old woman with white hair and wrinkled skin walked into the courtyard. She seemed to be startled. Li Erling, your house is not well built. It's very ominous. Li Qingshan frowned. This was the witch who gave him the water talisman when he was young. All day long, she played tricks and fooled these ignorant and backward villagers. He never had a good impression of her. However, she had great prestige in the village. If there were any weddings or funerals in the village, they would ask her for divination. Of course, during the divination, there was no lack of offerings to worship the gods. Li Qingshan did not dare to be negligent. He bowed and said, "Why are you here?" The witch did not even look at him. She looked around the house and said, "There's Yin Qi and evil spirits here. Luckily, I'm prepared." She held a jar in one hand and a willow branch in the other. She dipped the willow branch into the water in the jar and sprinkled it around the house and yard. She shouted, "Go, go." Li Qingshan could not stop her. He could only let her do whatever she wanted. Although he already believed in ghosts and gods, he did not believe that there was any Yin Qi or evil spirits here. There was a real monster following him. If there was really something wrong, Oxen would naturally tell him. It would not be her turn. After the witch sprinkled the water, she seemed to have done Li Qingshan a great favor. She nagged a lot more. It was nothing more than that Li Qingshan could only have this luck because of the god's gift. Now it was time to return the god's gift. The best thing to worship the god was naturally the big pig head left behind by the wild boar. Li Qingshan finally understood why she came. He said, "I'm afraid it's not the god who wants to eat it. It's you who wants to eat it, right?" Faced with Li Qingshan's little rudeness, the witch flew into a rage. She straightened her body and said in a different voice, "Li Qingshan, if you don't listen to my advice, there will be a disaster." Li Qingshan knew that this was the witch's trick of inviting the god to possess her. If an ordinary villager saw this trick, they would be scared pale and kneel down to kowtow. Even the original Li Qingshan did not dare to completely ignore it. But now was different from the past. He crossed his arms as if he was watching a joke. He said, "There is no door to fortune or disaster. Only people can bring it on themselves. What does it have to do with the god? Please." Seeing that this trick did not work, the witch returned to her original state and said gloomily, "Just you wait." Not long after the witch left, the disaster really did come. A villager came to invite Li Qingshan to the ancestral hall. Although the village was small, there were many rules. The separation of the family from his brother should have been done in the ancestral hall in front of the village elders. However, he should have been the one to bring it up first. Did his brother beat him to it? Li Qingshan felt rather uneasy, but Oxen was nowhere to be seen, so he could only brace himself. The so-called ancestral hall was just a small house with a very deep doorway, but it was a rare brick building in the village. Inside, the ancestral tablets of the ancestors of the Li and Lu families were enshrined. In the pitch-black house, a few old people stood to the left and right. At the very front was the village head of Crouching Ox Village. He was in his 60s and had a crooked back. He was also a member of the Li family. According to seniority, Li Qingshan had to call him grandfather. The Li couple were already waiting there. As soon as they saw Li Qingshan, they glared at him viciously, as if Li Qingshan had harmed them somehow. There was a hint of delight from revenge in their gazes. Li Qingshan ignored them. He only bowed to the old people before beginning the separation under the village head's supervision. Originally, Li Qingshan thought that all he would get was oxen and a few acres of farmland. He never thought it would actually be much more complicated than he had imagined. The village head was stern and impartial. He gave many miscellaneous items to Li Qingshan, such as a spoon and a pair of chopsticks. With each item, the sister-in-law's heart would twitch painfully. Her gaze towards Li Qingshan became more and more vicious. Li Qingshan remained unfazed. He remained composed. Moreover, the miscellaneous items were all useful. so he did not have to buy them all again. After a whole hour, the village head stopped just now. He looked around with his murky eyes. "Do you have any objections?" The Li couple accepted it, but Li Qingshan felt that something was off. "Grandfather, what about those acres of farmland?" "What farmland?" Li Qingshan was stunned. When his father and mother passed away in the past, they had said it clearly in front of this person. They were afraid that his elder brother would bully him, so they wanted this esteemed old man of the village to uphold justice for him. The sister-in-law had already spoken. "You're still young and ignorant. Those two old things didn't return the money they borrowed. They've already paid them back." Li Qingshan flew into a rage. "What did you call my father and mother?" "Say that again." Although he did not have any particularly deep feelings for them, they were still his birth parents in this life. How could he allow someone to humiliate them in public? Brother Li had already stood in front of the sister-in-law. A few men also walked in from outside the ancestral hall. It was obvious that they were prepared. Li Qingshan also noticed that these people were all scoundrels and scoundrels from the village. Normally, all they did was steal from others and bully others. They did not care about the camaraderie of fellow villagers at all. They would never show mercy when they laid their hands on them. The village head secretly cursed the stupid woman and sighed, "I've already checked the receipt." "Where is the receipt?" Brother Li replied, "We've already burned it when we got it." "May I know who he owes money to?" The sister-in-law proudly said, "The village's steward Lu. If you have the guts, go and ask for it. See if Steward Lu doesn't skin you alive." Could it be that immortals were all good-for-nothings? Oxen only said 8 words: "Meat strengthens the body, and wine strengthens the liver and gallbladder." Li Qingshan clenched his teeth, raised his head, and gulped down the wine. Although it was only the village's unrefined wine, he still felt dizzy after drinking the gourd. He stared blankly at Oxen. Could it be that it wanted him to drown his sorrows in wine? "Go kill someone, and I'll teach you cultivation." Oxen said in an extremely calm tone, as if it was talking about something insignificant. Then it lay down. Li Qingshan felt a chill run down his spine. He suddenly realized that the thing in front of him wasn't a hard-working old bull that had been plowing the fields with him for more than 10 years, but a real bull's spirit. What it taught him was not the peaceful Tao of immortals and Buddhas, but the fierce and domineering Tao of demons. It hadn't taught him any cultivation techniques. It only taught him to eat meat, drink wine, and now kill people. Was he really going to kill people? Faces appeared in front of him. He hated these people, and he wanted nothing more than to kill them, but he knew that he didn't dare to do so. Oxen also saw through this, which was why he wanted to drink wine, to strengthen his courage. Was this a proof of allegiance, or a gift to become his disciple? Thinking back to what happened today, the drunkenness and anger rose. Li Qingshan raised his head, took a deep breath, and lowered his head. "Kill who?" "That's your problem. I'll say it first. I won't help you, and I won't save you. I'm just an ordinary bull." Tonight, the moon was bright, sprinkling a layer of white frost on the ground. Li Qingshan walked alone on the white frost. He felt that the full moon above his head was so dazzling that he wished for a dark cloud to cover it up. The village was silent. Li Qingshan's footsteps swayed as he walked around the village. His heart was at a loss. He came to the front of a rundown house, and there was a hubbub coming from inside. Li Qingshan heard it clearly. It was the ruffians from the ancestral hall today. He hurriedly squatted down against the wall and listened to what they were saying. "Today's wine came so easily. I just stood in the ancestral hall, and Steward Lu gave me so much." Li Qingshan recognized the voice at once. It was patch-haired Lu, a famous ruffian in the village. He spent his days idling around and stealing things. He was surly and fierce, and he often carried a chopping knife with him. The villagers were afraid of him, and even if they caught him stealing, they didn't dare to do anything to him. The other ruffians also treated him as their leader. "This is all because of you, Big Brother. Didn't you see that kid's face? He was so scared that it turned pale." The room roared with laughter. Li Qingshan didn't know what his face was like at the time, but it was definitely red now. His drunkenness mixed with anger rushed to his head. "It's a pity that the coward didn't make a move. I haven't exercised my fists and legs in a long time. I was going to use him to practice, but that bastard never took me seriously." Li Qingshan had lived 2 lives, but he wasn't as afraid of him as the ordinary villagers. He didn't expect to attract such hostility. Isn't it easy for Big Brother to beat him up? That idiot built his house outside the village. Wouldn't it be easy for us to beat him up? We can also take his cow and sell it at the market. We can even exchange it for a few drinks. The other ruffians agreed one after another. Li Qingshan let out a breath that reeked of alcohol and tightened his grip on the short knife in his arms. Patch-haired Lu drank a bellyful of alcohol and went outside the house to pee. He didn't return to the house, but walked along the small path to the south of the village. Li Qingshan felt strange and immediately followed him. He saw that patch-haired Lu came to the door of the famous Widow Lu in the village and shouted for her to open the door. Only then did he know what he wanted to do. The door was tightly shut, and the lights in the house were not turned on. It was obvious that they were afraid of him. There were a few thatched cottages not far away, but no one paid any attention to them. Patch-haired Lu took advantage of his drunkenness and said a lot of obscenities. He kicked the door hard and cursed for a while, causing the dogs in the village to bark loudly. Then he turned around and left. Inside the door, Widow Lu calmed down a little. She peeked outside through the crack in the door and saw that patch-haired Lu had indeed gone far away. Only then did she relax. Suddenly, her eyes flashed and she saw a figure following behind patch-haired Lu. The night was dark, so she couldn't see the figure's clothes and appearance clearly. She thought it was his attendant, and she faintly felt that something was wrong. Li Qingshan followed patch-haired Lu to a desolate place. He made up his mind, shouted, and pounced on him. Patch-haired Lu turned around in shock and saw a dull, short knife stabbing at him. He immediately sobered up and wanted to run away to resist, but his hands and feet were weak. He usually only used a knife to scare the common people and fought in a few group fights. He had never experienced a real life and death fight. Although the other party was only a youth, his decisiveness and murderous aura made him look like a fierce beast in the mountains. Without any obstruction, the knife entered his body. Li Qingshan didn't expect that the usually arrogant patch-haired Lu would be so weak. Looking at the frightened and pleading look on patch-haired Lu's face, he seemed to be even more drunk. His eyes faintly glowed red, and his brain seemed to stop working. Only his hands kept moving. The blade and blood-red light danced about in the darkness. By the time Li Qingshan had calmed down, patch-haired Lu had already collapsed in a pool of blood. He was as dead as he could be. The heavy smell of blood also gave off a chilly smell in the moonlit night. Li Qingshan forcefully composed himself and turned around to leave. He rushed to the stream below Crouching Ox Hill in a single breath. Just now he stopped. Illuminated by the water, he could not help but leap in fright. Is this still me? The water reflected a bloodied youth. He pursed his lips and widened his eyes, still radiating with killing intent that had yet to disperse. It was extremely terrifying. Li Qingshan cupped the icy cold stream water and washed away the blood on his body. Only then did he return to the hut. He ignored Oxen, who lay beside him, and collapsed on the bed. Only now did his hands begin to tremble, and he suddenly became covered in cold sweat, drenching his clothes. He had completely sobered up. Oxen asked with a smile, "Aren't you going to run?" It was as if it was not the one who had told Li Qingshan to kill people. He raised his head and asked with a smile, "Brother Ox, do you still need to hold a banquet to formally acknowledge me as your master?" Oxen said, "Which of your wine and meat wasn't brought by me? What banquet to formally acknowledge me as your master?" Li Qingshan spread his arms and said, "I'll help you gather some tender grass, all right?" Oxen's eyes darkened. "Stop joking around. Since you have the intention to kill, that's why I taught you the art of killing. In the future, you'll inevitably have to fight with others. You won't have a single day of peace. If your cultivation isn't enough and you get killed, you'll have no regrets. The weak are prey to the strong. It doesn't matter where I go. I don't dare to say that I have no regrets. That's all." Oxen said, "No regrets? Since you've made up your mind, I'll teach you the ox demon's fist of great strength. When you've cultivated the strength of a bull and laid down your foundation, I'll teach you the tiger demon's fist of bone training. With these two skills, you'll be able to practice the supernatural power of Taoism, the strength of 9 bulls and 2 tigers. By then, you'll be able to do whatever you want in the world." The strength of 9 bulls and 2 tigers? When Li Qingshan first heard about it, he found it quite ordinary. What was so special about 9 oxen and 2 tigers? They were just the most ordinary of livestock and wild beasts. Were they really worthy of being called supernatural abilities? Could they run amok in the world? But when he thought about it carefully, he was shocked. He had been herding bulls for more than 10 years and knew how strong a bull was. A bull's strength was equivalent to 10 strong men. As long as one could obtain the strength of 1 bull, they would be able to wear armor and fight on the battlefield. They would be worthy of the title of a fierce general. There was nothing special about 9 bulls and 2 tigers, but if all these strengths were gathered on one person, he would have the strength of 1,000 caddies with just a lift of his hand. Who would be able to stop him? Even if Lu Bu was reborn and Li Yuanba was alive, they wouldn't be able to stop a light punch from him. But since it's a supernatural power of Taoism, why is it called the ox demon and the tiger demon? This supernatural power was originally an ancient supernatural power. It's been lost now. When Li Qingshan heard the word ancient, he became excited. From what he knew, any elixirs, secret manuals, or treasures, as long as they were related to the word ancient, they would be extremely powerful. But Oxen's following explanation disappointed him. The reason why this supernatural power was lost was because it was too difficult to use. It was replaced by other supernatural powers created by the geniuses of later generations. In short, it was eliminated. The ancient sages were indeed powerful, but the later generations might not necessarily be inferior to the predecessors. Moreover, they were standing on the shoulders of the predecessors. The cultivators of the current era value the cultivation of qi and look down on the cultivation of the body. They even refer to the body as a smelly bag. This kind of supernatural power that pursues brute force naturally won't be taken seriously. You don't have to be too disappointed. This supernatural power that I'm teaching you is no longer the original version. It was modified by a powerful figure of the demon race. That's why it's called the ox demon and the tiger demon. The ox demon cultivates the body, while the tiger demon cultivates the bones. As the saying goes, when the Tao rises 1 foot, the devil rises 10. Its power is also much stronger. Are there any drawbacks to cultivating this supernatural power with my human body? I don't know. Because no one has tried it before, I might go berserk and become a demon. Oxen said it casually, but Li Qingshan could only smile bitterly. It was fine if he cultivated an ancient supernatural power that had been lost for a long time. At most, he would become a weirdo and be laughed at by other cultivators. However, cultivating a supernatural power that had been modified by the hands of a demon could turn him into a monster. He might even be slain by the demons. But now was not the time for him to be picky. Li Qingshan thought for a moment and took a deep breath. "Brother Ox, please teach me this supernatural power." If someone could understand his desire to change his fate, they would understand that he would accept even the devil's help. Oxen explained the essence of the ox demon's fist of great strength to him in detail. Li Qingshan immediately started practicing. He moved his body and moved his limbs. Under the dazzling sunlight, an old ox and a young man sat in the shade of the trees. The old ox lay down leisurely and gave pointers. The young man's expression was solemn as he listened attentively. Although Oxen could not practice it himself, every word he said would hit the nail on the head. This made Li Qingshan suddenly see the light and gained a deeper understanding of the ox demon's fist of great strength. He practiced with more vigor. Although Oxen spoke carelessly, he was very satisfied with his disciple-esque comprehension, as expected of a person who had unlocked his innate wisdom. This kind of person would not live in the wilderness for long. It was unfortunate that he was born in a village deep in the mountains. His fate was really not good. He was like a dragon swimming in shallow water and a tiger falling into the plains. Otherwise, he would have stood out in any prosperous city, whether it was in martial arts or literature. He would have become a hero and would not have to suffer the anger of a few foolish villagers. Chapter 6. Oxen had seen many so-called geniuses, each of them gifted with extraordinary talent and godlike luck, but only a few of them were able to achieve anything in the end. On the contrary, many ordinary people who were originally unknown became famous and walked to the peak of the cultivation path. Over the past few years, it had purposefully watched on coldly from the sidelines, allowing Li Qingshan to go through hardships and trials. Only at the crucial moment would it speak up. It was like a master craftsman slowly tempering the material in his hands, all for the sake of forging it into a supreme divine weapon. What ordinary people cared about were external things like talent and luck, but it valued a person's will. If you were someone with a strong will, even if I gave you a great opportunity, would you be able to take it? Just like that, one was willing to teach, and the other was willing to learn. Naturally, they improved at lightning speed. In less than 2 hours, Li Qingshan had a general understanding of the ox demon's fist of great strength and vaguely grasped the essence within. Although the ox demon's fist of great strength was a fist scripture, it focused on training the muscles, bones, skin, and flesh to strengthen the body. The fist technique was actually secondary. There were only 3 moves divided into ox demon butts its horns, ox demon stomps its hooves, and ox demon flexes its hide. They were all the most basic moves of the fist technique, but they could go from simple to complex, giving rise to countless variations. Of course, mastery was one thing, and practice was another. If he wanted to achieve anything, he would need to grind away at it over a long period of time. Li Qingshan had already witnessed the 2 most basic requirements for practicing this ability: alcohol and meat. No matter what technique, it was impossible to create something out of nothing. To make a person powerful and powerful, there was a process of conversion, gathering the essence of the sun and moon and absorbing the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. When one's cultivation reached a certain level, they could eat the wind and drink dew, abstain from food, and use the spiritual energy of heaven and earth to replace the food of the mortal world. Li Qingshan only had a mortal body. How could he communicate with the spiritual energy of heaven and earth? He could not find elixirs or spiritual medicine, so he could only use the most common things to constantly replenish and refine his spiritual energy. Even though Li Qingshan had eaten meat for a few days, his body was still not tough enough. He barely managed to practice the 3 forms once. Sweat poured down his body as he gasped for breath. His stomach growled. By noon, he ate all the wild boar meat, as if he had been starving for 3 days. His appetite was even greater than the first time he ate meat. He could not lie down and rest even at noon. Instead, he meditated and nurtured his qi, experiencing the sensation of qi that he did not have. Only when his body had mostly recovered would he practice another set of fist styles. He repeated this several times until evening. Li Qingshan was completely exhausted. He did not even want to move a single finger. 3 shadows sneaked to the front of Li Qingshan's thatched cottage. Li Qingshan heard the noise and walked out of the gatehouse, only to see the 3 ruffians who often hung out with patch-haired Lu. He was afraid that they were here to avenge their big brother. He could not help but secretly complain in his heart. Right now he was exhausted. How could he be their match? Even on a normal day, he could not defeat 3 people. However, he did not expect that when the 3 ruffians saw him, they were like mice seeing a cat. They bowed their heads and begged, "Spare us." This made Li Qingshan stunned, and he asked, "What are you doing here?" Little did he know that patch-haired Lu's death had left the 3 scoundrels utterly terrified. They were afraid that patch-haired Lu would not stop even after Li Qingshan had killed him and would come to make trouble for them tonight. As a result, they came to explain themselves reluctantly. All they said was that they had been instigated and ordered around by someone. All of their crimes were because of patch-haired Lu and caretaker Lu. Li Qingshan said, "You don't need to say anything. I know all these things." That night, he heard everything very clearly, but of course he could not readily agree to it. The one who killed patch-haired Lu was him. The 3 ruffians' hearts trembled when they thought of that night. This fiend was just outside the window. They felt even more terrified. Li Qingshan vaguely understood why these 3 people were so afraid. He remembered that in his previous life, the small town he lived in was once plagued by a murderer. All kinds of rumors were flying everywhere, scaring people to the point that no one dared to go out at night. Thus, he was given this kind of halo of a murderer. Evil people were also divided into different levels. The 3 ruffians were only small evil scoundrels who stole chickens and dogs. In front of a big evil scoundrel like him, they could only bow their heads and listen obediently. His expression did not change, but his heart was somewhat strange. He had not yet mastered any magical powers, but because of some changes in his mind, his status in the village had undergone a tremendous change. And these changes were all caused by oxen. Perhaps this could be considered turning something rotten into something magical. Li Qingshan did not pay attention to them. He forced himself to practice Ox Demon's Fist of Great Strength one more time. This time, there were 3 people present, so he practiced especially attentively. He knew that right now he was only bluffing. If someone found out that he had exhausted all his tricks, the consequences would be unthinkable. The 3 ruffians carefully watched from the side. They had been in the village for so many years, but had never heard of Li Qingshan knowing fist techniques. In the darkness, Li Qingshan's movements were fierce and full of strength. It was obvious that he was not fooling them. They couldn't help but think of what the witch had said. Perhaps Li Qingshan was really possessed by a demon. Seeing that the sky was getting darker and darker, they were so scared that their stomachs cramped. They wanted to leave but couldn't open their mouths. They were afraid that Li Qingshan would suddenly reveal his true form and swallow them whole. After Li Qingshan finished practicing, he ordered, "Follow me." He walked out the door, minding his own business. The 3 ruffians looked at each other and had no choice but to follow behind him. At this time, many villagers were eating in front of the door. Those who were familiar with Li Qingshan carefully greeted him. Chapter 7. Regaining the silver, the Li couple was pleasantly surprised. Madame Li didn't even care about the pain on her face, as she hurriedly put the bag of silver into her clothes. The three scoundrels were speechless and showed expressions of admiration. That wasn't a small amount of silver, enough to spend for a long time, but it was thrown on the ground so easily. Looking at Li Qingshan's back, if they had only been afraid before, they now had a lot of respect. Such a good man who could distinguish kindness and grudges was just a story made up by storytellers. They didn't expect to see it with their own eyes. He was already so young, so he would definitely be someone in the future. The contempt they had for Li Qingshan's young age completely disappeared now. Li Qingshan walked in front with large strides. The sun was setting in the west, and the mountains were silent. He felt extremely relaxed and calm, as if he had unloaded an invisible burden. His body was filled with strength, and even his fatigue disappeared. He faintly felt that if he were to practice Ox Demon's fist of great strength now, it would be much smoother than during the day. This wasn't an illusion. Whether it was Taoist supernatural powers or ordinary martial arts, they all had to be in harmony with the mind of the practitioner. Ox Demon's fist of great strength was originally a martial art that was open and closed. It required one's mind to be clear and to advance bravely. Li Qingshan was happy to settle this grudge, and there were no more obstacles in his heart. Naturally, it was in harmony with the essence of the martial art. Back in the hut, Li Qingshan looked at the three scoundrels with bright eyes. Just now, I have to thank you all. If it weren't for these three scoundrels, his brother and sister-in-law wouldn't have given in so easily. If they were to wield a wooden pole and a cleaver, he really wouldn't have been able to do anything. He might even have suffered. He was moved by this, but he didn't expect things to go so smoothly. He also understood the benefits of numbers. Ox Demon King still needed 6 sworn brothers, let alone him. Of course, these 3 scoundrels weren't fit to be his brothers. The 3 scoundrels hurriedly said, "Big brother, what are you saying? You are a magnanimous person and didn't bother with us. We can't even thank you enough." Patch-haired Lu didn't know what was good for him and deserved to die. "We followed him and offended him in the past." Li Qingshan waved his hand and interrupted, "Let bygones be bygones." Receiving this promise from him, the 3 ruffians felt their hearts relax, their thoughts became active. One after another they began to flatter him. When they were talking about their love, they almost wanted to plant grass as incense and become sworn brothers with him. In his previous life, Li Qingshan had never been flattered and praised like this. Even though it came from the mouth of 3 scoundrels that he looked down on, he couldn't help but feel happy and proud in his heart. However, it was impossible for them to become sworn brothers. After a perfunctory reply, he sent the 3 of them away. Oxen, who was lying on the side, said, "Why didn't you agree? If they are willing to accept you as their leader, you will be safer in this village. If there is any news, there will be people who will inform you." In a small village, manpower was what mattered most. Most of the time, if a family had more brothers and more sons, other people wouldn't dare to bully them, and they could even bully others. Li Qingshan said boldly, "Even if the people I, Li Qingshan, want to befriend aren't heroes who can roam the world, they are still men of steel who value friendship and righteousness. How can I associate with such people?" His voice was so loud that a few crows were startled and flew up, hovering around the treetops. Oxen was silent. Looking at Li Qingshan's high-spirited appearance, he fell into deep thought. Li Qingshan felt embarrassed and rubbed the back of his head. "Brother Ox, you must laugh at me for boasting, but this is what I think in my heart, and I'm only saying it for you to hear." Out of nowhere, Oxen took out a gourd of wine and tossed it to Li Qingshan. "If you don't even dare to say a few big words, Then you might as well go back to farming. What other big words do you have? Tell me. Li Qingshan skillfully removed the cork and raised his head to gulp down a few mouthfuls of wine. He casually wiped his mouth and grinned. I want to travel all over the world, taste all the delicacies in the world, drink all the good wine in the world, cultivate the most powerful divine arts, fight the strongest enemies, and sleep with the most beautiful women. Only then will my life not be in vain. Brother Ox, do you think this dream of mine can come true? Definitely. All right, I'll take your auspicious words. The young man's great dream echoed through the tiny courtyard. Perhaps even he did not take it seriously right now, but a spark had already landed in his heart, about to ignite a prairie fire. Taking advantage of the alcohol, Li Qingshan practiced the 3 forms of the ox demon's fist of great strength again. In his half-drunk state, he had no idea whether his movements were right or wrong. He only swung his fists and kicked as he liked. Meanwhile, Oxen only drank on one side and said nothing. Li Qingshan collapsed on the ground, drunk. The next day, the news of Li Qingshan returning the land money to his brother and sister-in-law spread through the village very quickly through the mouths of the 3 ruffians. Some people were filled with admiration towards his choice, praising him for his extraordinary spirit. There were also people who mocked him. Without land, what would he eat? Wouldn't he still have to work for caretaker Lu? I'd like to see if he still had any spirit by then. However, they were not too bold to say it out loud. Li Erlang's name had already begun to establish itself in the crouching ox village. Caretaker Lu was both happy and worried about this. He was obviously happy that Li Erlang would no longer bother with him over this piece of land, but he was worried that Li Erlang was someone who could clearly distinguish between kindness and grudges. Perhaps he was just holding back his hatred right now, only looking for an opportunity to take revenge. After all, patch-haired Lu had been ordered around by him in the past. If Li Erlang came looking for him right now, it would be for the best. He had thousands of ways to deal with him, but he could not be on guard day and night. Sure enough, it was better to bully an old man than to bully a poor young man. Caretaker Lu pondered in the hall. A hunchbacked old man arrived before the gatehouse under the support of a young man, but he was stopped by the guards at the gate. Caretaker Lu immediately went up to receive him. He smiled with his chubby face. "Great village head Li, what brings you here?" "Village head," Li said sternly, "I don't know when you set up guards here. May I ask what you're guarding against?" Caretaker Lu smiled awkwardly. His clan was a landlord, but it was still a small village in the mountains after all. It obviously could not be as well connected as the large clans in the city. There was only an old gatekeeper, so why would there be anyone guarding the gate normally? Although he had done everything he could to annex the land in the village, it was still mostly through legitimate transactions. Even if he bullied people, he would bully those who could not fight back. He did not have that many enemies. The person he had to guard against right now was obviously Li Qingshan. In his eyes, this kid was originally someone who could not fight back, but his reaction in the end had taken him by surprise. The two of them went into the house to talk. Village head Li did not beat around the bush, saying, "Caretaker Lu, you're someone who has seen the world. Tell me, how should we deal with this Li Erlang?" His eyes were bloodshot. The villagers were afraid of Li Qingshan, and he was afraid too. The older people got, the more afraid they were of death. Last night, he lay on the bed, tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Whenever there was any movement, he would immediately sit up. He was afraid that Li Qingshan would sneak in and take his old life, so he almost did not sleep the whole night. He got up early in the morning and made up his mind that if he did not get rid of this worry in his heart, he would not be able to live, so he came to Caretaker Lu. Caretaker Lu spread his hands and said, "How should we deal with him? The villagers all respect him as a good man. Besides, there's no proof that patch-haired Lou was killed by him. How could it not be killed by him? It's almost written on his face, said the young man beside village head Li. He was village head Li's son, Li Hu. He was also a tyrant in the village, but now his prestige was weakened by Li Qingshan, so he was very dissatisfied. Even if it's written on his face, you won't recognize it. Caretaker Lu glared at him. You're just a kid, and you dare to be rude in front of me. He looked at village head Li and softened his tone. Do you know what he did last night? Chapter 8. Steward Lu said, but he has to eat. Lu Hu said, then who doesn't have to eat? As the saying goes, old people become shrewd. Village Chief Li's eyes lit up. You mean, if he wants to eat, he has to work. Who in this village can afford to hire him? If he works under me, we will be at the mercy of us. Steward Lu looked at the admiring expression of Village Chief Li and his son and felt proud. Food is the most important thing for people. Food doesn't fall from the sky, but grows from the ground. Controlling the land is equivalent to controlling the lifeblood of the people. If they don't eat for 3 days, even a strong man will become a soft-footed shrimp. Steward Lu had already thought of a countermeasure. There was no need to kill him. He just needed to knock him down and see what his attitude was. If he could be used, it would not be a bad thing. Li Qingshan woke up from his dream, so he had no idea about these schemes. All he saw was a deer lying in the courtyard. He sniggered, but he did not even thank the black ox. He skinned the deer and cut off its flesh with great familiarity. This time, he had already prepared some salt to marinate the deer's flesh, just in case he would not be able to eat it. After these preparations, he went to the stream to wash his face and rinse his mouth. Then, he began a day of cultivation. For the next few days, he got up before dawn and went to sleep when it was dark. He almost didn't step out of the house and completely cut off contact with the outside world. Every day, he practiced until he was exhausted, but he didn't feel it was hard and boring. He worked hard for his dream. Every step forward, every improvement seemed to open up a new world in front of him. After more than 10 days, Li Qingshan had just finished eating the musk deer. Village head Li couldn't stand it anymore. He hadn't had a good night's sleep these days. Every night, he had to let his 2 sons stay by his bedside to barely sleep. At his old age, how could he eat and sleep like this? Seeing that he was about to get seriously ill, he quickly came to discuss it with Steward Lu. Steward Lu also waited anxiously. Every day, he sent servants to watch outside Li Qingshan's hut. The first servant reported that Li Qingshan drank and ate meat every day and even practiced martial arts. He didn't believe it at first, but after a few servants said so, no one dared to try again. The theory that the witch was possessed by a demon surfaced in their minds again. Li Qingshan's courtyard seemed to be shrouded in a layer of mystery and terror. In some people's eyes, Li Qingshan's diligent practice of martial arts was to prepare for revenge. Seeing that Village Chief Li was on the verge of tears, Steward Lu furrowed his brows and made up his mind. Invite him to the banquet. If he dares to come, then he's a real man. If he doesn't, then he's just a pretentious coward. An invitation card was delivered into Li Qingshan's hands. He fiddled around with the large red invitation card. In a small village like this, people would usually invite people for weddings and funerals. Very few people would issue an invitation like this, so he could not help but find it rather novel. He muttered to himself, this was a banquet that would never be good. If he went, he might just be walking into a trap. He had only practiced his supernatural power for about 10 days. Although he had gained a lot, it was still difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. But if he didn't go, then the prestige he had painstakingly built up would go down the drain. When other people mentioned him, Li Qingshan, They would definitely say that he didn't even dare to attend a banquet, which would tarnish his reputation. If he showed weakness now, the attacks would be endless. This move of Steward Lu's was truly a deep scheme, forcing him into a dilemma. Oxen said, "Are you going?" "I just ran out of food." "Since someone is treating me, why not?" "Guan Yinchang is going alone." "Do you think I'm afraid of eating this village wine?" Li Qingshan laughed, his chest full of heroic spirit. "Who is Guan Yinchang?" "He's a hero I've heard of." Li Qingshan stood up, gathered his strength in his arms, and used Ox Demon, but its horns. At the same time, he breathed out, and the faint sound of a cow's mooing came from his lungs. It was as if a large water buffalo was waving its horns, preparing to fight the enemy. Oxen nodded in satisfaction. Li Qingshan's Ox Demon's fist of great strength was already at the beginner level. He was improving at a godly speed. If he were to carefully avoid the slightest bit of danger, it would definitely be detrimental to his cultivation. It just so happens that I still have some grudges with someone that I haven't finished cleanly. I can't be too quick about it. This is a good opportunity. Ever since the day Li Qingshan settled his grudge with the Li couple, his Ox Demon's fist of great strength had indeed improved a lot. This proved that his guess was not an illusion. Summer was about to end, but the sun was still dazzling. In Steward Lu's courtyard, under the shade of a few elm trees, a table had already been set up. A group of able-bodied men sat at a few square tables. They looked at the wine and dishes on the table and swallowed their saliva. Only Steward Lu's family could afford such a banquet. However, with the craftiness of farmers, they knew that this banquet was not for free. Steward Lu had already explained many things to them. Something about smashing a cup as a signal. In any case, they didn't really understand. They only knew that if Steward Lu turned hostile, they would have to use their fists. Although they weren't too willing to become enemies with Li Qingshan, they were all workers in Steward Lu's fields. They didn't dare to offend this person who provided them with food and drink. In any case, that Li Erlang was only 15 years old. How could he fight against so many people? Therefore, all the workers who could come came, filling up a few large tables. Even if they couldn't bear to do it, they could only go easy on him. They wanted Erlang to kneel and apologize to Steward Lu so that he would suffer less. The cicadas chirped weakly above their heads. Everyone was a little impatient from waiting. They could only look at the good wine and food, but they couldn't eat it. This was quite a test for them. The sound of discussion drowned out the cicadas' chirping. It's about time. He's afraid and doesn't dare to come. Let's hurry up and eat. If it were you, you wouldn't be afraid. It's right that he doesn't come. Only a fool would come. Steward Lu acted as if he didn't hear them. He only smiled slightly and thought, it's good that he knows fear. He's just a kid after all. He's here. A young worker was sweating profusely. He jogged into the courtyard. Li Erlang is here. Everyone in the courtyard seemed to be strangled at the same time. They couldn't make a sound. The chirping of the cicadas seemed to become louder in an instant. Li Qingshan stood in front of the Lu residence's gate. He was also very nervous. Everything was easier said than done. The Lu residence's green bricks and white walls in front of him was like a small dragon's pool and tiger's den. If he wasn't careful, he might lose his life inside. He wanted to retreat. He thought of the saying, for a gentleman to take revenge, 10 years is not too late. With his current speed of improvement, as long as he was given time, 1 year, no, half a year, or even 3 months, he would be able to master the demon ox fists of great strength to a certain level. Then he wouldn't have to be afraid of anyone in this courtyard. He suddenly became spirited. He asked himself, Li Qingshan, oh, Li Qingshan, could it be that everything you said before was just bullshit? that you only dare to bare your teeth at people weaker than you in this life, even if you master the unparalleled divine power, you're still just a coward. Li Qingshan filled the bowl and drank it in one gulp. Satisfying, seeing him drinking so boldly and straightforwardly. The workers also admired his courage. Unexpectedly, quite a few of them cheered him on. Li Qingshan had eaten a lot of greasy food these days. When the wine washed over him, he felt extremely refreshed. He didn't stop and drank 3 bowls in a row. When the 3rd bowl of wine went down his stomach, the courtyard was filled with loud cheers. It was as if they weren't invited by Steward Lu, but by Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan burped and cupped his hands. Everyone, eat and drink well. Don't forget about Steward Lu's kindness. Whatever grievances you have, you can settle them after the meal. Anyway, even if you're on your way to the afterlife, you can't be a hungry ghost. Then he glared at the people at the main table. Why aren't you eating? Now that he was drunk, his killing intent rose. If these people kept looking for trouble, Crouching Ox Village wouldn't be safe. He might even fall into their trap at any time. If he killed a few of them and stole some of their belongings, none of the villagers would dare to stop him. Originally, Li Qingshan had only taken the risk to attend the banquet. He was even bluffing a little. In the end, he saw through Steward Lu and the others bluffing. In an instant, he turned from guest to host. His thoughts were also very different. He couldn't help but think of Uncle Lei Feng's words. Difficulties are like springs. If you're weak, they'll be strong. He then thought of what Taizu had said. Imperialists are all paper tigers. Yep, the landlord class is also a paper tiger. Although Steward Lu's schemes were a little clumsy, he had read many people. As soon as he saw Li Qingshan's expression, he knew that he was ready to kill. He could no longer maintain his pretense of shrewdness, and a thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. The old people in the village were terrified. They didn't want to die from hunger either. They hurriedly explained to Li Qingshan that they were only doing it for show. They didn't know the inside story at all. Someone stood up trembling and wanted to leave. Chapter 10. The elders trembled as they sat back on their chairs. Li Qingshan buried himself in eating and drinking. He had only been eating deer meat for the past few days. He was annoyed by it and wanted to change his diet. The table full of food and wine was swept clean by him. He rubbed his bulging stomach. The people in this courtyard are my elders. Some of them watch me grow up. But there are people who don't care about this and bully me just for a few acres of land. If you don't give me an explanation today, I will give you an explanation. Even if I lose my life, I won't regret it. As Li Qingshan spoke, he pulled out his knife. Steward Lu, village head Li, don't you think so? Steward Lu was determined not to suffer such a loss. He gave in and said, Erlang, if you want to plant those acres of land, you can take it back. Li Qingshan said, I don't want those acres of land. You bought them with money. I don't want to take advantage of you. I just want justice. You can do whatever you want in the village. Don't forget that the gods are watching. Justice exists in people's hearts. As he spoke, his voice became stern. Steward Lu was embarrassed and couldn't say anything. Village head Li reacted, This is our fault. We listened to your brother. That's not my brother. Li Qingshan coldly interrupted. Li, duh, and the others were talking nonsense. They were blinded by lard. That's why they did such a stupid thing. I couldn't sleep for the past few days. I'm afraid that one day when I die, I won't be able to face your parents. Village head Li's voice was full of tears as he spoke. He was thinking about the suffering he had suffered these past few days. Li Qingshan then said to the elders, Then tell me, should that piece of land be given to me? Yes, yes. At this moment, no one dared to say no. Li Qingshan got what he wanted. He raised his head and laughed. So there is justice in this world. His laughter suddenly stopped. He lowered his head, and his expression changed. Sometimes it was solemn, and sometimes it was relieved. There was a hint of indescribable sorrow. He looked at the knife in his hand. So justice is here. He frowned and murmured, "There is no God 3 feet above the head. Justice is only in the blade. There is no God 3 feet above us. Justice is only in the blade." His voice grew louder and louder, shaking the entire room. He was originally indignant and wanted to vent his anger, so much so that he didn't hesitate to kill. At this moment, he felt that it was pointless. He sheathed his saber and no longer paid any attention to the people in the courtyard. He turned around and walked out of the door. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared without a trace. The workers ate a free banquet and watched a good show. Satisfied, they dispersed. They were all talking about Li Qingshan, and their faces were full of admiration. Caretaker Lu wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead. He knew that if he wanted to gather people to deal with Li Qingshan again, it would be even more difficult. Even though he controlled the land, the workers were not his slaves. They would not listen to his orders. Even if they were slaves, they could still rebel. If he incited all the workers to oppose him, then it would be absolutely terrible. Fortunately, Li Erlang was a person who kept clear tabs on his debts of gratitude and grievances. Since he had said all that today, he would no longer scheme for revenge. He could sleep in peace. Although the banquet was not a success, he had achieved his objective, albeit barely. Village head Li stood up under the support of his 2 sons. Although he was still embarrassed, his expression seemed to have eased up. It seemed like he was thinking the same thing as caretaker Lu. The 2 of them looked at one another. They both felt embarrassed. Li Hu refused to accept this. "Father, why don't we get my elder brother back? With his martial arts, I refuse to believe he can't deal with Li Erlang." Li Bao also said, "Uncle Lu, isn't Brother Lu in Qingyang City too?" Village head Li just happened to be furious. He said viciously, "Shut up, all of you. How did I give birth to useless things like you?" Caretaker Lu did not reply. They had all been through a lot, so they knew how to play it safe. They would never put themselves in danger for the sake of personal feelings. "You bunch of useless people. The gods have already been angered. He doesn't have long to live." The witch, who had remained silent the entire time, suddenly said mysteriously and viciously. Under the scorching sun, many people could not help but shiver. In this day and age, people revered ghosts and gods, and witches were the people who communicated with the gods. Just now, Li Qingshan had actually said, "There are no gods when you look up." Perhaps he really had angered the gods. Some people even recalled that there had once been a family in the village with a sick child. They asked the witch to treat them, but the witch also said that the child was possessed by a ghost. She burned him with fire and drowned him with water before covering him with blankets in the end. She said she wanted to force the ghost out, but she smothered the child to death instead. The witch only said that this was a request from the king of hell, and no one could save him. However, the adults of the child refused to listen to her. The child's mother even cursed outside the witch's door every single day, which greatly damaged the witch's prestige in the village. However, a few days later, the child's mother suddenly died of illness. She died mysteriously. The witch only said that the child was missing his mother in the underworld. From then on, no one dared to disrespect her anymore. However, Li Qingshan had kicked her in front of everyone and cursed at her a few times. He had already offended her quite badly. "Caretaker Lu, this child is a disaster in your life." Now that the gods have resolved this problem for you, caretaker Lu hurriedly ordered people to wrap some incense, candles, wine, and meat for the witch. The witch then looked at village chief Li. Village chief Li also gritted his teeth and took out a small piece of silver to send the witch away. A worker carried these things and followed behind the witch. He didn't dare to speak too much until they arrived in front of a brick house. Apart from caretaker Lu and village chief Li, she was the only person in the village who could afford to live in a brick house. There was an incense table and an incense burner in the hall. Smoke curled around it all day long. It was both a residence and a temple. Little and Grandma is back. The witch suddenly spoke in a hoarse voice. A mysterious smile appeared on her wrinkled face. It was definitely not a benevolent smile. The worker knew that the witch had no children or grandchildren. He was scared witless and hurriedly put down the things. Chapter 11. His courage increased his strength, and his strength in turn increased his courage. The two complemented each other. He practiced all the way until dusk. He actually felt hungry again. He was still very skinny, completely unlike Li Hu and Li Bao, who were plump and strong. Only he knew that the essence of the deer's flesh and blood was not wasted at all. All of it had been integrated into his body. His body seemed to have become a bottomless pit, greedily digesting and absorbing all the wine and meat, transforming it into strands of energy. After practicing, Li Qingshan sat on the ground again. He closed his eyes and calmed his mind, feeling every change in his body. Pulling one's muscles and bones was an extremely painful thing. He still remembered the second day of practicing Ox Demon's fist of great strength. He was in so much pain that he couldn't get up. Oxen didn't try to persuade him. He endured the pain and got up to practice. After persisting for more than 10 days, he finally got a little better. No, it should be said that his endurance had become stronger. Logically speaking, after enduring the first few days, his body should have slowly adapted. However, the pain in his body didn't lessen at all. It was as if he had just started practicing every day. Every change in his body was vividly reflected in his mind. It was a pity that he didn't feel the so-called qi. According to Oxen, no matter what kind of magical art it was, as long as one could feel the flow of qi and cultivate a strand of true qi, then one could be considered to have crossed the threshold. However, his time of cultivation was still too short. At this moment, he suddenly felt a strand of coldness at the back of his neck like a gust of cold wind. However, there was no wind at all, and it was even more impossible for there to be a cold wind. Could this be the so-called qi? Li Qingshan was overjoyed. He focused all his attention on the coldness, but he gradually realized that the coldness was slowly invading his skin. It was getting deeper and deeper into his bones, and even into his soul. It was extremely cold and made him very uncomfortable. Li Qingshan shook his head and stood up to practice. The cold qi dissipated a little, but as soon as he sat down, it clung to him again. He didn't know what went wrong, so he went to the stream next to the hut to wash his body. The moonlight was bright that night. He looked into the stream and saw a pale-faced child clinging to him expressionlessly. Even though he was quite courageous, he broke out in a cold sweat. This scene immediately reminded him of a movie called The Grudge in his previous life. If Li Qingshan was an ordinary person, he would have been scared out of his wits. However, Li Qingshan had been with the Ox Demon for a long time. He looked at the child through the stream and saw that the child was no more than 7 or 8 years old and had a dull expression. Li Qingshan asked, Why are you lying on me?" However, the child only moved his head. At this time, the water surface rippled, and the reflection of the child disappeared. However, the cold and gloomy aura clearly remained. Li Qingshan tried hard to calm his mind. I've run into a ghost. I don't know why this little ghost is clinging to me. I can only wait for Brother Ox to come back and discuss it with him. Fortunately, it won't take my life for a while. However, he didn't have much confidence. He only felt fear. The Yin Qi invaded him faster and faster. He hurriedly practiced Ox Demon's Fist of Great Strength again. Only then would the cold Qi disappear. However, he wasn't a robot that didn't know fatigue. He had to sit down and rest. It was especially hard to bear. Until the middle of the night, when the Yin Qi was the strongest. The cold Qi had already invaded half of Li Qingshan's body. He didn't feel any obvious pain, but his limbs gradually became numb and his 5 senses became blurry. An extreme sense of danger stimulated him to use all his brain power. He heard that people had a yang qi in their bodies that could restrain Yin ghosts. He thought that when he practiced the fist, his blood vessels would expand. That was why the little ghost didn't dare to come close. Therefore, when he was meditating, he tried to simulate the feeling of practicing the fist. Closing his eyes, he mobilized his mind and contracted his muscles. It was indeed useful. He barely managed to resist the invasion of the Yin Qi. He endured like this for an entire night. His mind was sometimes muddled and sometimes clear. He trained his willpower until his willpower was on the verge of collapse. When the rooster crowed, the sky turned white. Li Qingshan suddenly opened his eyes. The sunlight shone on his face through the treetops. It was a little dazzling. The cold qi on his body disappeared. Oxen was looking at him, not far away. He looked very interested. Li Qingshan said, "Brother Ox, where did you go? Do you know what I ran into last night? I came back a long time ago. Wasn't it just a little ghost lying on top of you? You just stood there and watched. What else could I do?" Li Qingshan twitched his mouth. He didn't say anything. Oxen had already told him that no matter what danger he was in, he shouldn't expect him to help. He didn't give him the chance to rely on him from the very beginning. He glanced at the yellow gazelle beside Oxen's feet. He couldn't say anything. Oxen had already provided him with the most important help. He couldn't rely on him for everything. Basking in the warm morning sun, Li Qingshan stood up and stretched his body. Luckily, the little ghost didn't dare to come out during the day. Otherwise, I really wouldn't have been able to hold on. Brother Ox, I have practiced the supernatural power of Taoism. Can I deal with a little ghost? If you didn't practice the supernatural power, you wouldn't have survived last night. When you have the strength of one ox, your body will be full of vigor. Naturally, you won't be afraid of this little ghost. Then I don't know how long I have to wait. Other than that, I have another idea. What idea? Ghosts are most afraid of murderous aura and malevolent aura. If you have hundreds of human lives on your hands, you can guarantee that all evil will flee. The little ghost won't dare to come within 10 steps of you. Li Qingshan rolled his eyes. Do you want me to slaughter the entire Crouching Ox village? It's not impossible. What do you think? Do you want to try? Oxen chuckled. Why don't I slaughter you and make steak first? Li Qingshan ignored it. He dealt with the yellow gazelle and finished his breakfast. He put this matter behind him. For now, enduring the exhaustion in his body and mind, he focused on the day's cultivation. However, as soon as he began cultivating, he felt that today was slightly different from usual. There was a thin strand of qi flowing through his body. If he did not concentrate, he definitely would not be able to sense it. The strand of qi was not like the jinqi described in wuxia novels, which was stored in the dantian and circulated along the meridians. Instead, it was flowing everywhere like a fish swimming between his limbs and bones. When he swung his fists, the strand of qi would flow to his arms and fists, but only for a moment. As soon as he relaxed his mind, the strand of qi would run away. Like a naughty child, it was almost out of his control. He told this situation to Oxen. Oxen was not surprised. Instead, it said meaningfully, "You have to thank that little ghost for being able to sense the existence of qi so quickly. This can be considered a blessing in disguise." At the critical moment of life and death, Li Qingshan mobilized all of his spiritual will to resist the invasion of the Yin Qi. The little ghost had left, but this spiritual will remained, turning into a strand of Jinqi. "So this is Jinqi?" Li Qingshan looked at his palm. "What is the use of this Jinqi?" Chapter 12. Li Qingshan felt that Oxen's words were not entirely truthful, as if he was hiding something. However, in his joy, he had no time to think too much about it. He immediately began to practice and feel the effects of the Jinqi. As expected, after a short while, he felt the knack of it. Today, his practice of Ox Demon's Fist of Great Strength was smoother and easier than it had ever been before. It was like an old machine that had been lubricated, giving him an indescribable sense of joy. Furthermore, the speed at which he could recover his qi was much faster. This seemed like a small matter, but when normal people fought against their enemies, they often didn't dare to attack with all their strength. Because if an attack with all their strength was dodged by the enemy, their body would inevitably stiffen for a moment, leaving behind a huge opening. He didn't have to worry about this. In the time it took for others to throw one punch, he could throw 3 punches with all his strength. Even if they were of equal strength, they still wouldn't be his match. Li Qingshan's heart couldn't help but be overjoyed when he finally got a sliver of results after more than 10 days of hard work. He felt that he was one step closer to his goal. However, when he thought of the dangers and hardships of the previous night, his expression turned cold. "But I do want to know who gave me this blessing." Oxen said in a seemingly casual manner, "There is no door to fortune or disaster. Only people can bring it upon themselves." However, Li Qingshan's heart lit up. These were the words he said when Witch came to ask for the pig's head. The little ghost definitely didn't come to bother him for no reason. After thinking about it carefully, he immediately had some ideas. He was born and raised in this small mountain village, so he knew a little about some of the important things that happened in the village. In this remote little village, there weren't many things that could be considered important to begin with. One of them was a few years ago when a family in the village broke up due to an illness of a child. Li Qingshan was also a child at the time, so he still recognized the child named Xiao Mao. He never expected that the child would die because of this. It was also because of this example that Li Qingshan obediently returned to his original state after drinking the talisman water. He didn't dare to reveal any of his shocking abilities, and at the same time, he extremely hated Witch. Xiao Mao's mother's death was very strange. She died suddenly in one night, and there was no reason for it. Li Qingshan originally thought that it was because she couldn't bear the pain of losing her son, but now it seemed that she was invaded by Yin Qi. He suddenly stood up, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "So that's how it is. I can't let her go." Oxen said, "Then let's go kill her." "It's not that simple." Li Qingshan sat cross-legged and lowered his head in deep thought. The witch was not someone whom patch-haired Lu could compare with. Not only did she have a lot of prestige in the village, she also had a bit of fame in the surrounding villages. There were often outsiders who came to pray to the witch for divination. If he killed her, he would have no choice but to go far away. He might even report it to the government and be put on a wanted list. Moreover, he had no evidence now, so he couldn't insist that she was the one who did it. Most importantly, since she could order the little demon around, it was still unknown if she had any other tricks up her sleeve. Oxen didn't interrupt from the side, but he was very approving in his heart. If Li Qingshan relied on yesterday's prestige and went to fight and kill the witch in a hot-blooded manner, then it would be a waste of his painstaking efforts. Nothing in this world was perfect. It was hard for brave people to be rash and careless, while intelligent people were often hesitant and lacked a bit of decisiveness and courage. The 4 words sword courage and zither heart were the hardest to come by. Li Qingshan made up his mind and went to the village. "Oh, it's Erling. Have you eaten? If not, come to my house." At the entrance of the village, an old man was waving a hoe in the vegetable garden. As soon as he saw Li Qingshan, he warmly greeted him. What happened in the Liu family's courtyard yesterday had already spread throughout the village. The originally unknown Li family's Erling had now become a celebrity in the village. Regardless of age, they all had a bit more respect for this youth. Li Qingshan responded to them one by one. He passed through more than half of the village and came to a small courtyard with a few willow trees planted in front of the door. A small old man in tattered clothes was leaning against the tree. He was drunk early in the morning and had the air of a hermit master. Li Qingshan knew in his heart that this wasn't some hermit master, but an ordinary farmer. He was also Xiao Mao's father. His name was Li Fugue. In reality, he wasn't even 40 years old, but he looked to be in his 50s or 60s. Ever since his wife and son died, he didn't do much farm work. All day long, he drank to drown his sorrows and acted like a lunatic. Seeing Li Qingshan approach, Li Fugue said vaguely, "Come, drink, drink." The stench of alcohol hit him in the face. Li Qingshan frowned. He grabbed Li Fugue and dragged him into the empty room. Without saying anything, he scooped up a ladle of water and poured it into his mouth first, choking Li Fugue to the point of coughing. He leaned against the door and began vomiting. Li Qingshan looked around the thatched house. It was tattered everywhere, and spider webs hung all over the window. It could really be called a house with only 4 walls. Li Fugue's family was also famous in the village. The land they owned was second only to Steward Liu's family. He was worthy of the name his parents gave him, and his family lived a happy life. Who would have thought that the world was fickle? An unexpected disaster would lead to such an end. Li Qingshan couldn't help but sigh. The little happiness of mortals was really too fragile, but he was determined and ambitious. He couldn't bear to see people become dispirited and degenerate, so he didn't hold back. Li Fugue said angrily, You, what are you doing? Uncle Li, are you awake?" Li Fugue saw Li Qingshan's hostile gaze and shivered. It was not like he was blind or deaf. He knew exactly what Li Qingshan had been doing in the village during the past few days. He was a true malefic. What's the matter? Do you know how Xiao Mao's mother died?" Li Qingshan went straight to the point. I don't know anything." Li Fugue was so scared that his face turned pale. He didn't care about anything else and walked out. Li Qingshan grabbed his skinny wrist. "Is this how you treat your wife and son?" Li Fugue's body froze. "Erling, it's not that I don't want to tell you, but it's trouble that you can't afford to provoke. Don't throw away your life in vain. I don't want to cause trouble, but trouble has already come to me. If I live like you, it's better to throw away my life in vain. You just need to tell me what happened that year." Li Fugue was shocked. "What? Trouble has already come to me." After hesitating for a while, he let out a long sigh and began to narrate. After Xiao Mao's mother cursed in front of the witch's door, she went home and slept. The next day, she couldn't get up. Her body became cold and blue. That night, many strange things happened, and I also saw what? A child. Li Qingshan was finally sure that the murderer was the witch. Moreover, the witch also told Li Fugue that Xiao Mao not only missed his mother, but also his father in the underworld. Li Fugui was so scared that he gave her a large amount of offerings. Li Qingshan slapped the wall. "You've really gone too far. Have you never thought about avenging your wife and son?" Li Fugui's face turned red from the contempt in his words. He ran into the room and took out a long package from the bottom of the big wooden box. He opened the package, and inside was a knife, a good steel knife. Li Qingshan unsheathed the knife, and a cold chill hit him in the face. It reflected on his face, and his hair could be seen. The knife's handle was about 1 foot long and slightly curved. It was wrapped in black silk and felt very comfortable in the hand. The knife was about 2 feet long and 4 inches wide. It was much better than the knife in Li Qingshan's hand, which was only 1 foot long and was a poorly made knife. The witch stowed the money away carefully. Suddenly, her face twisted. "What's going on? Why isn't Li Er dead yet? Are you not doing your job diligently? Do you want me to deal with you?" Fear appeared on the child's blank, wooden face. He shook his head furiously. The witch suddenly shook the bell in her hand. The child ran around the room in pain, kicking up chilly winds and dispersing the smoke. After quite a while, the witch stopped ringing the bell just now. "Good, listen to Granny. Granny won't mistreat you." She handed an embroidery needle that was as thin as a hair to the child. "Take it. Stab his eyes blind." The child grasped the embroidery needle with difficulty and flew towards crouching Ox Hill with the night wind. Under the night sky, Li Qingshan continued to meditate in the courtyard with his eyes closed. The child walked over and raised the embroidery needle in his hand, slowly stabbing it towards Li Qingshan's eyes. In the eyes of regular people, there was only a needle flying through the air by itself, let alone the fact that the embroidery needle was extremely thin. Even during the day, it was difficult to see, let alone at night. Li Qingshan sensed something and suddenly opened his eyes. He ignored the embroidery needle that was only inches away from him and stared at the child's pitch-black eyes like a sharp sword. "What do you want to do?" His eyes shone brightly like 2 balls of fire were burning in them. In the evening, just as Li Qingshan was in unbearable pain, the indistinct aura in his body suddenly began to move, swimming through his eyes. The pain immediately lessened by quite a lot. When the scorching pain vanished, a cool sensation flowed through his eyes, making him feel extremely comfortable. At this moment, he suddenly felt a sense of danger. He opened his eyes and just happened to see the little ghost from last night standing in front of him with the embroidery needle. He was surprised inside and felt some lingering fear. Originally, he thought the witch only had a few tricks up her sleeve, so she definitely would not face him head-on. It was not like the little ghost's yin qi could harm him, so he had underestimated her. However, if it were not for the fact that he could suddenly see ghosts, it was likely that he would have been ambushed and had his eyes destroyed. As a result, he would have been better off killing her earlier. The child was even more surprised. Under Li Qingshan's furious glare, he trembled all over, and the embroidery needle in his hand fell to the ground. He drifted far away. Li Qingshan studied the little ghost closely and discovered that he was only around 6 or 7 years old. He was extremely handsome, and if it were not for the fact that his face was ghastly pale, he really did seem like a match made in heaven. He wore silk robes, which must have been his attire when he was still alive. He did not seem like a little ghost that had been driven away, but the young master of a large clan. When the child saw that Li Qingshan could actually see him, he did not dare to move forward. However, he was afraid that he would not be able to complete the task and would be punished by the witch, so he did not dare to leave. Li Qingshan no longer had any fear in his heart. Things that could not be seen were the scariest. Now that he could see it clearly, he discovered that the little ghost was even more afraid than he was. He opened his mouth and asked, "What is your name?" Where are you from? But no matter how he asked, the child did not answer. Li Qingshan's heart moved. You can't speak. The child hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Li Qingshan thought that the child was only being used by the witch, and that it had unfortunately died at such a young age. Perhaps it was also killed by the witch. So he felt a little pity for the child, and his attitude became gentler. You were so close to me yesterday. Why are you hiding now? Come closer. I have something to ask you. The child saw that his expression had become less frightening, and like a timid little beast, he walked a few steps closer. Li Qingshan said, Since you don't want to speak, then just nod or shake your head to answer. Do you understand what I'm saying? The child nodded. They were like rats crossing the street, and everyone wanted to beat them up. They wanted to learn Patch-Haired Lu's rudeness or Li Qingshan's fierceness, but how could they learn? Suddenly, even eating became a problem, let alone eating meat and wine. They could only work as helpers in Steward Lu's house and barely make a living. How could they compare to the carefree life they had before? At this time, Li Qingshan suddenly came. The three ruffians hurriedly went to greet him. They saw that his expression was grave and stern. He held a knife in one hand and meat in the other. He naturally exuded a powerful aura. No one dared to look down on him because of his age. The three ruffians also softened their voices and praised Li Qingshan's actions the day before. Li Qingshan ignored their flattery and put down the meat in his hand. There's one more thing I need to trouble you guys with. This meat is your reward, along with a piece from last time. How could we do that? Erlang, just say the word, and we'll go through a mountain of blades and a sea of fire. The three ruffians said this as they hurriedly caught the mutton. Just like last time, Li Qingshan said, Follow me. He turned around and left. Only this time, he wasn't bluffing anymore. It was an unquestionable order. The three ruffians didn't dare to hesitate and blindly followed behind him. Li Qingshan first borrowed a hoe and shovel from a nearby farmer's house before going to Li Fugui's house. At this time, it was almost noon. The villagers had finished their morning farm work, and it was time to pack up and go home for lunch. They saw Li Erlang, who was really famous in the village, bringing three ruffians to borrow tools. They didn't know what they were going to do, so they curiously followed behind. This shocked almost all the villagers. When they saw him coming to Li Fugui's house, they thought, is he going to teach that drunkard a lesson this time? How did that drunkard offend him? But in their hearts, they all felt a little ashamed. Relying on their numbers to bully a pitiful and impoverished person and shouting at the village head and steward in the Lu residence were completely different actions. One was not afraid of violence, and the other was bullying the weak. But the three ruffians were very happy. I knew this old drunkard was not a good person. They even patted their chest and volunteered. I'll drag him out now. They hadn't been so proud for a long time. This time, they were going to use Li Fugui to show their power and beat him up in front of everyone. Li Qingshan glared at them and shouted, Are you coming? Just when everyone was feeling strange, Li Fugui ran out of the house, gritted his teeth, and said, Coming. He looked surprisingly sober, which made the villagers feel strange. Usually, Li Fugui looked drunk, but they didn't know that after Li Qingshan left, he didn't drink a sip of wine. He thought about it day and night, but they didn't expect that on the next day, Li Qingshan would come looking for him. Once the resentment within was released, it stopped, which was lying on the ground on her last breath. She hadn't died yet, but it was clear that she wasn't far from death. He guessed that she must have cultivated some kind of cultivation method to be able to hold on, which stretched out her remaining chicken claw towards the child in the corner. She seemed to be pleading and resentful as she called out, Little N, Little N. Little An looked at her in a daze and fear. Li Qingshan said, "I'll send you on your way." The thick steel knife in his hand stabbed downwards. Steward Lu and village chief Li rushed over when they heard the news. They didn't even have the time to shout something like, "Spare her life," before Witch died. They looked at each other and broke out in a cold sweat. They remembered that Witch had said arrogantly a few days ago that Li Qingshan didn't have long to live. Today, she had lost her life. They were even more thankful that they didn't force Li Qingshan that day. Otherwise, who knew what the result would be? This was Li Qingshan's second time killing someone. Compared to the first time when he was panicking in the dark, this time in broad daylight, he was very calm. He had improved so much that even he was a little surprised. He thought to himself, could it be that the ox demon's fist of great strength has aroused the demonic nature in my heart? Or is this my true nature? In the modern society of his previous life, many people couldn't express their true nature. They could only go with the flow and live according to the times. Not to mention adults in their 30s or 40s. Even youths had lost their passion and ambition. He was just one of the many people, no different from a normal person. But after going through the cycle of life and death, it actually aroused the heroic spirit in his chest. He didn't want to live a mediocre life anymore. But he was suppressed by the hard life in this small mountain village for 15 years. Finally, he had this opportunity. Once his heroic spirit was released, he really was like a crazy demon and refused to restrain himself. Li Qingshan stopped smiling and turned his head to say, "Don't panic, you two. This old woman asked for it. She deserves it. I still need you to uphold justice. You broke into a house and killed someone in broad daylight, and you still want us to uphold justice?" These words only swirled in the hearts of the two. Naturally, no one dared to say it out loud. Suddenly, one day, he rushed out of the crowd and came in front of Li Qingshan. He kowtowed 3 times and raised his head. "I killed her. It has nothing to do with Erlang, this old witch destroyed my family. Xiao Mao, father has avenged you." After he finished speaking, he cried and laughed. It was Li Fugue. This big stone that had been pressing on his chest for many years was suddenly lifted. He felt that even if he died, he could die in peace. No one in the village knew what happened to Li Fugue. They couldn't help but be silent. Only Steward Lu showed an embarrassed and fearful expression. It was because Li Fugue encountered this accident that he used alcohol to drown his sorrows and sold his family's fertile farmland. That was how he was able to achieve the illustrious name of half-village Lu. If Li Qingshan suspected him of colluding with the witch, then wouldn't it be terrible? Li Qingshan said, "I will take responsibility for my own actions. I don't need you to take the blame. Please come with me." He called the 3 ruffians and a few prestigious elders in the village to come to the witch's backyard. Li Qingshan turned his head and nodded to the eaves. The others followed his gaze, but there was nothing. Little An was hiding in the shadows, pointing to an empty space. Under Li Qingshan's order, the 3 ruffians began to dig the ground. Under Li Qingshan's gaze, they did their best and didn't dare to be lazy. In a short while, they had dug a big hole and dug out a skeleton. Li Qingshan went down to collect the skeleton. He looked back at the eaves and ordered, "Continue to dig." This wasn't Little An's skeleton. Under Little An's guidance, Li Qingshan had the people dig in a few more places. A few more skeletons were dug out. The surrounding people were shocked. How could there be so many skeletons buried in the witch's backyard? And every one of them seemed to be the skeleton of a child. Li Qingshan was also shocked. His expression became more and more serious. He knew that these were the victims of the witch's witchcraft. The ghost fog full of resentment he saw must have come from this place. He only hated that the old hag had died so quickly. At this time, there was a ding sound as if they had touched something. They carefully opened it and found a tightly sealed porcelain jar. Without waiting for Li Qingshan to stop them, the three ruffians rushed to open the jar. A small cloud of black gas rushed out. As if afraid of sunlight, it went straight into the mouth and nose of one of the ruffians. Chapter 16. The other two ruffians were so scared that their faces turned deathly pale. They were unable to move, but the contents of the porcelain jar blinded their eyes. The porcelain jar was filled with sparkling silver. They had never seen so much money in their entire lives. Even Steward Liu and the few old men who were on the verge of death revealed expressions of eagerness. Li Qingshan pushed them away. They were about to fly into a rage. No matter how timid they were, for the sake of wealth, their hearts would beat faster, and they would become fierce. However, when they saw that it was Li Qingshan, they didn't dare to make a move. Li Qingshan didn't care about what they were thinking. He took out the porcelain jar and put it to the side. Under the jar, a small skeleton appeared. The flesh and blood on the skeleton had long been stripped away, revealing a grayish-white color. It was unknown how long it had been buried. Little and finally nodded. Li Qingshan sighed softly. He looked around and poured out all the silver in the jar, placing the white skeleton inside. The silver ingots rolled to the ground and formed a small hill. At this moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on it. They didn't even care about the skeleton anymore. Steward Liu was someone who had seen the world. He estimated that there were at least a few hundred taels of silver. Even he would be jealous, let alone the others. In a small mountain village like this, it was really a huge sum of money. Li Qingshan didn't expect that which had collected so much silver over the years. As the saying goes, wealth moves people's hearts. He wasn't an immortal who didn't eat the food of mortals. He was also tempted by this wealth. After all, he would need money for many things in the future. In terms of eating meat, he didn't want to always rely on oxen. Since oxen wanted him, he would show it. He also wanted to change his diet. Perhaps he could go to the market and buy a few jars of good wine. However, he also understood the principle of people die for wealth and birds die for food. If he took all the silver away, these people would be afraid of his power and wouldn't dare to say anything. However, they would definitely resent him and bury a lot of seeds of disaster, even the death of which might not be able to appease them. Village Chief Li, you are the most respected person in this village. What should we do with the silver? Tell me. Li Qingshan wiped the blood off his thick steel knife and sheathed it. It seemed that he wanted Village Chief Li to make the decision, but he emphasized the words highly respected. Not at all. This is all thanks to Erlang. You killed a big scourge in the village. This silver should be handled by you. Village Chief Li had played a disgraceful role a few days ago. He felt that Li Qingshan's words were full of threats. He didn't dare to respond. Li Qingshan looked around. The people he looked at all nodded in a hurry. Erlang, you deal with them. Erlang, you handle it. Just now, he nodded slowly. He didn't mind sharing some silver in exchange for peace. However, if anyone really wanted to take charge of his spoils of war, they would have to ask the knife in his hand first. This group of people was much older than Li Qingshan, but they had to listen to the arrangements of a 15-year-old boy. However, no one felt dissatisfied. The current Li Qingshan was no longer the Li Qingshan of the past. The ruthlessness and decisiveness of drawing his knife and killing people had already shocked them. Li Qingshan sat on the ground and distributed the silver. He pressed one hand on the porcelain jar with the white bones and the other on the knife. A group of adults and old people lowered their heads and listened to him. However, the first person to get the silver surprised everyone. Uncle Fugue, The witch destroyed your family. You should have some compensation. Take this silver. In the future, don't drink and drown people. Only then can you comfort the dead." Li Qingshan used the scabbard to poke at the edge of the small mountain of silver and took out some silver. How can this be good?" Li Fugui didn't expect Li Qingshan to say this. He was at a loss. "Take it." Li Qingshan was thanking and praising him for coming forward bravely just now and taking on the responsibility of killing people. Li Fugui gratefully accepted the silver. Li Qingshan called out to the two ruffians, "These are for you." He glanced at the dead ruffian on the ground. "And him. Go back and give him a proper burial. In the future, make a good living. Don't do dirty things like stealing chickens and dogs. Otherwise, I'm afraid there will be a disaster like this." The two scoundrels were both surprised and overjoyed. They stowed the silver away. When Li Qingshan mentioned their companion, they had both paled slightly, but they did not seem sad at all. Only the heavens knew whether they would specially spend money to bury their companion. Finally, Li Qingshan cupped his fists to Steward Lu, village chief Li, and a group of old people in the village. "A few days ago, I offended you. This silver is my apology. I hope you can forgive me for not being sensible. However, if there is anyone who doesn't respect the old and bullies the weak—" Although he said this, there was no sign of apology on his face. As he spoke, his tone became even more stern. We won't," these people said repeatedly. Li Qingshan nodded and took out a pile of silver for them to distribute. "What about the other people in the village?" Village chief Li got his share of the silver and looked at the pile of silver that was left. Since Li Fugui, the victim, could get a share of the compensation, then there were many more victims in the village. It could be said that every family had given an offering to the witch. Li Qingshan glanced at him. "Does anyone have any objections?" Although he sympathized with the villagers who had been deceived, he didn't plan to pay for their stupidity. If he hadn't killed the witch quickly, these people might have been intimidated by the witch to deal with him. Moreover, it was absolutely unfair to divide the money. In the end, not only would he not get any benefits, but he would also become the target of everyone's resentment. Village chief Li also saw through this, so he came to trip up the youngster who was in the limelight. To put it bluntly, the interests of the villagers had nothing to do with him. Instead, it was the person in front of him who was increasingly threatening his authority in the village. Maybe in a few years, when he really grew up, he wouldn't even be able to keep his position as village chief. However, he didn't expect Li Qingshan to be so meticulous at such a young age. The glance that seemed to see through his thoughts made him even more frightened, and he didn't dare to say anything more. Chapter 17. Little Anne's expression was both happy and confused. Li Qingshan searched through the witch's room again. Little Anne followed behind him like a shadow. Suddenly, he extended his little hand and tugged at his trousers, pointing at a place. Li Qingshan found a secret compartment in the wall. There was a stack of paper inside, all of which were silver notes. He had vaguely heard that this world also had banks, but this was the first time he had seen actual silver notes. Presumably, the witch had buried the silver when she was in her prime. Later on, she grew old and frail, unable to dig anymore. That was why she had exchanged all her loot for light silver notes, storing them in this secret compartment. There were roughly a few hundred taels of silver. She was so rich, yet she had fallen out with him over a pig's head, resulting in her death in the end. And at the very bottom of the secret compartment, Li Qingshan finally found what he was looking for. It was a page of book paper, covered in tiny characters. At a glance, it was a technique for refining souls and controlling ghosts. The edges of the paper were uneven, as if it had been torn out of a book. Li Qingshan practiced the ox demon's fist of great strength and had gained a rudimentary understanding of the path of cultivation, so he was curious about other techniques as well. He never thought the witch's strange technique would only come from a single page of the book. If she had possessed the entire book, he probably would have died here today. However, if the witch had an entire book, she probably would not have holed up in Crouching Ox Village for half her life. The witch was not originally from Crouching Ox Village. She had suddenly settled here several decades ago, and no one knew her origins. Even Li Qingshan had no idea where she had obtained this page of book paper. However, there was a silver note under this page of book paper. It was actually a huge sum of 1,000 taels of silver. This silver note was extremely yellowed, and it was obvious that it had been around for a long time. It was definitely not something she had earned after coming to Crouching Ox Village. The witch's origins became even more mysterious. Li Qingshan asked Little, "And do you recognize this?" He felt that perhaps it had something to do with Little N's origins. Little N was speechless, neither nodding nor shaking his head. Li Qingshan knew that this was beyond what he could answer. He obviously accepted everything in the secret compartment without hesitation. Just as he was about to walk out the door, he felt Little N tugging at his trousers. Li Qingshan looked back and saw him staring at him in confusion, like a lost child. He was indescribably pitiful. His heart softened, and he crouched down. He asked gently, "Don't you have anywhere to go?" Little N nodded. Li Qingshan said, "Then accompany me for now." He opened the jar, knowing that Little N did not dare to walk under the sun. Little N smiled shyly and flew into the jar. Li Qingshan returned to the thatched hut with the jar and buried it behind the thatched hut, creating a small grave. The green ox returned and asked, "Did you succeed?" "She's just an old witch. How hard can it be to deal with?" Then he showed him the spoils of this trip and showed the page of the book to the green ox. He asked, "Is this also a divine ability? Can I practice it?" This remnant piece of paper is naturally nothing, but this piece of paper came from a supernatural power called the Dark Eam Ghost Control Art. I don't know how it fell into her hands, but cultivating this kind of incomplete thing probably won't bring her any benefits. Haven't you heard of biting off more than you can chew? You should practice the strength of 9 oxen and 2 tigers first. Oxen glanced at him and revealed the origin of the page. Then, which is stronger, the strength of 9 oxen and 2 tigers, or this Dark-Eam ghost control technique? If it's the original strength of 9 oxen and 2 tigers, then it's hard to say. Although the Dark-Eam ghost control technique does not focus on self-cultivation, it can gather a large group of ghosts and bully the weak. It's a supernatural power that is good at fighting. If you can't defeat the user in one move, it's easy to get drowned in the sea of ghosts. Then what about the strength of ox and tiger that I practice? Of course it's better. Li Qingshan calmed his mind and no longer hesitated. He put the page away. The other spoils of war were the money. Originally, Li Qingshan thought the black ox would not care about these mundane objects, but he never expected the black ox to say solemnly as soon as he heard that, "All right, compared to that piece of paper, this is what matters." Disdain for a supernatural power, but attach great importance to money. Even though Li Qingshan had experienced Oxen's education about eating meat and drinking wine, he couldn't help but be surprised. This brother ox was really worldly. Oxen saw through his thoughts. Haven't you heard of the words wealth, companionship, law, and land? These are all necessary conditions for cultivation. Wealth is still the first. Li Qingshan nodded. No matter what I do, I need a financial foundation. If Oxen didn't provide him with food, he wouldn't be able to practice even if he had the secret manual. But I don't think I need to spend too much money. 1,000 taels of silver was a huge sum. If he only used it to buy food and wine, it would be enough to support him for a long time. Oxen said. You keep asking me how long it will take me to master the ox demon's fist of great strength. Yes, but you won't tell me. I can tell you now, with your current cultivation speed, if there are no accidents, it will probably take you 10 years to master the first layer of the ox demon's fist of great strength and achieve the strength of a bull. 10 years. Li Qingshan's mouth opened wide in shock. And this is the shortest calculation. If you meet a bottleneck, it'll be even harder to say. The stronger the supernatural power, the harder it is to practice. Do you really think Taoist supernatural power is a country bumpkin? Do you think you can master it easily and become invincible? Wake up! As if a bucket of cold water had been poured on Li Qingshan's head, the joy he felt from killing, which was swept away. Then, if I want to completely master the strength of 9 oxen and 2 tigers, I'll need at least 110 years. He couldn't imagine what he would be like after 110 years. Wrong. The higher the level, the harder it is to practice. It's not surprising if you can't master it in 300 to 500 years. But you don't have to worry too much. Every time you master a layer, your body will strengthen and your lifespan will naturally increase. Then what should I do? Li Qingshan believed that he had extraordinary willpower and persevered in practicing every day. But if he had to persevere for a few hundred years, he would go crazy just thinking about it. Oxen saw that the blow was almost over and made a brat, now you know how powerful you are, expression. If you want to shorten this time, the easiest way is to rely on the word wealth. Ignoring Li Qingshan's strange expression, a list flew into Li Qingshan's hands. There were dozens of medicinal herbs listed on the list. It's used to make soup and wine. This is a trick that even mortals know. It doesn't matter if there are more or less medicinal herbs in it. The key is that one of them is indispensable. Ginseng. Li Qingshan already saw the medicinal herb at the top of the list. This was probably the most common and easily found spiritual medicine in the world. It was known as the king of herbs and could greatly replenish one's vitality. In Chinese medicine, there was a kind of soul return soup. When a person was about to die, they could recover some of their spirit and make a will. In reality, it was ginseng soup. Chapter 18. Then I don't seem to be any different from an ordinary martial artist. Of course there's a difference. An ordinary person's physique is weak and can't absorb any nourishment. Eating too much ginseng is not only not beneficial, but harmful. I didn't tell you in the beginning because your body is still weak, so it's useless to tell you. These days, you've been slowly recuperating, and you've cultivated a trace of essence qi. Now you've reached the requirement. I was planning to ask you to find a way to raise money. Now you can save some trouble, but I'm afraid the money won't last long. Li Qingshan also understood where the difference was. He could eat more ginseng than an ordinary person, and he didn't have to worry about a nosebleed. His body was like a cauldron, and with the help of divine arts, he could refine and absorb all the essence qi that entered his body without any waste. This also meant that Li Qingshan had to buy a lot of ginseng, and ginseng was an expensive medicine no matter what era it was. But he had to eat ginseng like a carrot, so no matter how much money he had, it wouldn't be enough. How much ginseng could he buy with the 1,000 taels of silver he had? He couldn't help but ponder this question. After lamenting, Li Qingshan could not help but admit that this was not bad news. The rate at which his strength grew would reach a whole new level. In order to pursue a breakthrough in strength, ordinary people would have to search for rare elixirs, and even if they took them, there might not be any effect. But he only needed to eat the most common and easy-to-get things, and his strength would continue to improve. God knows how many people would be envious of him, so why would he be dissatisfied? As for real money, there would always be a way. With enough strength, why would he be afraid of not having money? This little devil is a bit interesting. Oxen turned behind Li Qingshan, and its round eyes stared at Little, and who was hiding behind Li Qingshan. From the beginning to the end, Little and had been hiding behind Li Qingshan, and he quietly and curiously looked at Oxen. Little and was so scared that he hid to the other side, not daring to face this talking bull. Although Oxen didn't have any murderous or baleful aura, he instinctively didn't want to get close to him. You mean Little? And he has nowhere to go now, so I'll look after him for a while. You don't mind, right? Li Qingshan said it casually. If Oxen minded, they would not have said it in front of Little, and with only that piece of paper, she actually refined a ghost slave, and it is a ghost slave that can drive things. It is really incredible. Either the old woman is a genius in ghost refining, or the little ghost's spiritual quality is somewhat special. However, seeing that the old woman had been refining for so many years and sacrificed so many test subjects, but she had only refined such a ghost slave, it must be the latter. Li Qingshan looked at Little and what was so special about him? However, a little ghost was a very strange thing in itself. Oxen said, "Maybe he is your best trophy. Why don't you take him as a ghost slave? This child may be of great use to you in the future." "What ghost slave? He is just a child, and I have promised him to give him freedom." Even in the most difficult time, Li Qingshan was unwilling to go against his heart and sell Oxen for travel expenses. Of course, he was even more unwilling to do so now. Oxen felt that he had said too much and yawned. "That's up to you, but it has lost its master. If no one feeds it, it will not take long for its aura to dissipate, and its soul will fly away and disappear." Soul will fly away and disappear. Little and blinked his eyes in confusion. Ghosts are not poultry and livestock. Do they need to be fed? The dead can't be allowed to live in the world of the living. Even the extremely powerful ghosts can't resist the sunshine, and even a gust of wind can kill them. If no one died, and all the ghosts were left in time, it is unknown how many ghosts have been accumulated in the world for thousands of years. What should I do? At dusk, Li Qingshan strode through the mountains and forests with an axe on his shoulder, and a little ghost that seemed to be real wandered around him. Sometimes it ran far to the stream and looked at a fish curiously. Sometimes it flew to the treetops and touched a bird, but without waiting for Li Qingshan to call, it returned to him like the wind and looked at him eagerly. Li Qingshan shook his head and smiled back. For this child, he had a faint sense of responsibility in his heart. But behind them, the bird fell stiffly from the treetops, and the fish floated on the water with its belly turned white, which proved that this was not just an ordinary child, but a dangerous ghost. Li Qingshan searched carefully in the forest and finally stood in front of a big locust tree that needed more than 10 people to encircle and waved the axe to chop it. Although he didn't know the axe method or the knife method, the ox demon's vigorous fist contained the most basic and most mysterious method of using force. He could use any weapon freely. Every chop of the axe was powerful and heavy in the same place. Wood chips flew, and the huge tree fell. Li Qingshan didn't care about anything else. He only cut out a small piece of the wood core in the center and brought it to Little and reached out to touch the small piece of wood core, and his little face showed a comfortable expression. In the end, he simply turned into a gust of wind and went into it. Li Qingshan smiled. This was according to the method taught by Oxen. He found an ancient locust tree that was more than 100 years old. The locust tree had the natural effect of gathering spirits, which was very beneficial to spirits. Now that he tried it, it was indeed true. In this way, he didn't have to worry about Little Anne's soul dispersing. Back to the hut, He sat on the big stone in front of the door and carved the wood core into the shape of a wooden plate. After careful polishing, he carved the word and wore it on his waist. The yang qi in his body would slowly nourish little An's soul. He could also use the yin qi in little An to practice controlling the qi in his body. In the small courtyard, Li Qingshan sat on the ground and kept shouting, "Little and neck!" Little and hugged his neck. Under the stimulation of yin qi, the genuine qi in Li Qingshan's body was mobilized and flowed to his neck. Right arm. Little and quickly changed his direction and hugged his arm. Although his handsome little face was still pale, it was full of a childish and innocent smile, as if it was a very fun game. Until the moon rose, Li Qingshan just now got up and little and reluctantly retreated. Speaking of which, this was the first time Li Qingshan had truly fought with someone. Patch-haired Lu had no strength to fight back in his drunken state, and which had suffered a backlash from the ghost mist. The fist tore through the air, not giving anyone time to think at all. However, this was the effect of many days of cultivation. Li Qingshan subconsciously tilted his head to avoid it. His right foot stepped on the ground, and his body leaned forward. With his spine as the center, all the muscles in his body trembled, and as an Iron Mountain Lean smashed towards the young man with great force. Iron Mountain Lean was an extremely common move in fist techniques. Demon Ox's fist of great strength also had it, and it combined 3 of the moves at the same time. Demon Ox stomps on the ground. It stood firmly on its heels and exerted force from the ground. Demon Ox activates its hide. It had a tough body and could not be activated. Demon Ox butts its horns. It used its body as a horn to smash forward. All of its movements were done in one go. Oxen lay in the back and nodded in satisfaction. However, the young man turned pale with fright. It was as if a charging bull had charged at him. He felt a pain in his chest and was sent flying. He fell into the crowd, and all the muscles and bones in his body felt like they were about to fall apart. The discussions in the surrounding crowd stopped abruptly. The young man's companions were also stunned for a moment, and then they attacked in anger. Li Qingshan's expression became more and more serious. One-on-one and one-on-many were 2 completely different things. Unless the difference in strength was too great, it would be difficult for 2 fists to fight against 4 hands. If a strong bull was surrounded by a pack of vicious hunting dogs, it would only end up with pieces of flesh torn off and dying. Chapter 20. This was probably not just the power of that sliver of Xinqi, but also the miraculous effect of Oxen's tears. He ducked and dodged a punch. Ox Demon butts its horns. His fist struck out and knocked down another young hunter. But at the same time, a hunter had already circled behind him and punched fiercely at Li Qingshan's back. The other 2 young hunters grabbed Li Qingshan's waist, one on the left and one on the right, and slammed him to the ground. They spent their days hunting in the mountains and were well-versed in encirclement techniques. They were definitely not boorish men who fought on the streets. Even though Li Qingshan could defeat any one of them, he was instantly at a disadvantage. Seeing that it was too late to block, Li Qingshan focused all of his mental thoughts on his back. That sliver of Xinqi flowed with his heart. The muscles on his back twisted together, and a small bulge could be faintly seen. A heavy punch landed on Li Qingshan's back, but it was like hitting tough leather. All of the power dissipated as that bulge of muscle flattened. Other than a tremble from Li Qingshan's body, there was nothing else out of the ordinary. At the same time, the 2 hunters who had grabbed Li Qingshan's waist felt as if Li Qingshan's body was rooted to the ground. They could not move him at all. The three of them had used up all of their strength, and their momentum immediately weakened. Li Qingshan, who had suffered 3 heavy blows, had already recovered his breath. With a roar, his elbows dropped down. The ox demon, but its horns and ox demon's fist of great strength emphasized that, other than the fists and feet, the entire body could be used as horns. Elbows were the most powerful horns. The 2 hunters felt a sharp pain in their backs. They wanted to vomit blood and lay on the ground involuntarily. Li Qingshan suddenly turned around and pounced at the hunter, who had ambushed him from behind. He punched him in the chest and knocked him to the ground. The surrounding people were dazzled by what they saw. They only saw that the young man, who was at a disadvantage, beat the 5 men of the Drawn Reins village to the ground in just a few moves. They were all astonished. Li Qingshan looked at the 5 hunters who were groaning in pain on the ground, and then looked at his own hands. It was as if he could not believe that he had done this. His strength had unknowingly reached this level. But before he could rejoice, a large group of hunters suddenly rushed out with their hunting bows and knives drawn. They surrounded Li Qingshan with fierce eyes. For this gathering in Cypress Creek Town, the Drawn Reins village did not just send a few people. There were more than 20 of them, and they brought the entire village's accumulated fur goods. Just now, those few young hunters were just juniors who had followed their elders to see the world. Seeing that they couldn't sell their goods, and hearing that someone was selling animal hides for cheap, they all rushed over together to find trouble with Li Qingshan. However, he didn't expect that Li Qingshan would be taught a lesson instead of looking for trouble. Naturally, the elders would not sit idly by and do nothing. They quickly reacted and surrounded Li Qingshan. The 12 or so hunting bows were drawn, and the aura that exploded in an instant made him feel like a trapped beast that had fallen into a trap. His life and death were in the hands of others, and he actually felt a sense of despair. Compared to this, the feast at Hongmen, at Steward Lu's house, was like playing house. His mind was also as tense as a bowstring. He suddenly recognized the other party's identity. They were hunters for a living. Their expertise was not in their fists, but in the hunting bows in their hands. His ox demon forges. Its hide could block fists, but it definitely could not block sharp bows and arrows. At this critical juncture, he calmly pulled out the thick steel knife at his waist. His eyes scanned the surroundings, searching for a way to escape. He didn't expect that selling animal hides would also cause such a disaster. Although he was unwilling, he might have to kill someone in the middle of the town and carve out a path of blood. "Did you do this?" A strong man with a sickly face and a large bow on his back stood in the middle of the hunters and asked in a loud voice. Li Qingshan replied, "I did it." The man studied Li Qingshan in some surprise. If regular people saw this, their limbs would become weak from fright, yet this kid was so young, yet he was so calm. Just his mental fortitude was far greater than all the juniors in the village. He asked the short hunter that Li Qingshan had sent flying with the Iron Mountain lean, "Xiaohei, what's going on?" "Hunting chief, this kid has probably ruined our business." Xiaohei struggled to his feet. The crowd fell into an uproar. "Isn't the hunting chief of the Drawn Reins village?" "It's Huang Bingu." The so-called hunting chief was equivalent to the village head, but it was different from Crouching Ox Village, where old people held power. Those who could become hunting chief in the Drawn Reins village were all the strongest men in the village. They were in charge of all matters related to hunting in the village. As for Huang Bingu, he was the current hunting chief of the Drawn Reins village. He was a renowned figure, and Li Qingshan had heard of him a long time ago as well. However, he had never thought it would be the sickly man before him. He finally understood the origins of the name, Sickly Tiger. A person's reputation was like a tree's shadow. Li Qingshan obviously felt a heavy pressure inside, but he was no longer the Li Qingshan of the past. He sneered, "You came to ruin my business without saying anything, and now you're slandering me, saying that I've ruined your business. The Drawn Reins village really is tyrannical." Huang Bingge's face sank. He yelled, "Why don't you get up? You can't even defeat a single person in a group, yet you still have the face to lie on the ground and cry out in pain. Are you still worthy of being men of the Drawn Reins village?" Li Qingshan knew he had not gone easy on them, but under Huang Bingge's order, the 5 young hunters actually managed to stand up by themselves. Apart from their sturdy bodies, they felt great reverence towards Huang Bingge. Huang Bingge raised his hand, and all the hunters put away their sabers and bows. "We were in the wrong in this matter, but brat, you shouldn't have been so heavy-handed. If I hadn't been heavy-handed, the one lying here right now would be mine. It's rare for us to go down the mountain to sell furs. The daily necessities of the entire village depend on it. It's fine if you sell according to the market price, but this method of selling is messing up the market price, greatly harming us." Li Qingshan was silent,